Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant, and today I've got a rather special guest here. Drew Wagar, author of the novel Elite Reclamation and the upcoming novel Elite Premonition, has come along to answer a few questions. The questions were recently posted in the official Elite Dangerous forums, and they're going to be asked of Drew in just a moment. So, hello there Drew, thanks very much for coming along. Really appreciate you taking the time out to come here and answer all the various questions. Before we get to those questions though, just wondering if you'd like to say a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Obsidian Ant. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I don't think I've ever been live on your videos before, so this is quite a privilege. I'm very excited about this. So thanks very much to you, first off, and obviously huge props for all the videos that you do make. Just in terms of me, most people will know me through Elite as one of the official authors who wrote a book on the back of the Kickstarter back in 2012, actually, so it's quite a long time ago now. And there are a whole bunch of us who wrote books as a result of that Kickstarter. My one was called Elite Reclamation, and it had a few kind of evolving storylines that have been based off that in the game, and some characters that I'm sure quite a few people will be aware of that kind of came out of those books, which are also doing bits and pieces in the game now. I've been working with Frontier kind of off and on through that period, particularly heavily in the last year, because they asked me to write a sequel book to my first one, which is coming out later this year. And I've been involved in various other bits and pieces around with the community as well in that time. So probably best known as a writer. Outside of work, I'm a husband and father of two kids. I have a cat and a dog, and I do a fairly boring job in IT security. So that's probably a small potted history for you.
Great stuff. As you know, we've got some questions here. I've created a forum thread for members of the community to post questions and ask them of you, so we're going to go through the list there. There's quite a few questions, but I think we'll get to that now, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, and thanks to all the community folks who've put questions in. It's always great to hear them.
Yeah, there's a lot of great questions there. I think people are going to be happy and excited to get the chance to have some of them answered.
Fire away.
So we'll start with Shaniri. He posted the first question there in the thread. So the question is about the upcoming event. Of course, there's an event coming up in the game on the 29th of April. From what we know so far about the event, it seems to be surrounding some of the events surrounding the mystery of the former Dying Rift and some of the other events and characters from your books. We don't know too much about the event itself just yet. I guess that's going to reveal itself closer to the time. Anyway, Shaniri's question. He says, how much are you concerned about instancing issues might affect the result of the player event? He's also got a second question there. He wants to know what happens if the outcome of the event goes against your muse or your instincts.
That's a pair of good questions, actually. To say the first one, I mean, instancing. We all know about this problem. It's a limitation of the peer-to-peer networking design of the game. I understand it's a little bit better with version 2.3, but it's always been a problem. There's not much, obviously, we can fundamentally do about that in terms of working around it. There are a few techniques that you can employ, but there's a fundamental limitation as to the number of people that you can put in an instance. So what we've tried to do in the design of this event is to kind of work around that from a kind of structural perspective. We've split. That's one of the fundamental reasons, in fact, why there's not just one character involved here, that there's several. And in fact, one of those characters is exclusively on the Xbox. So because we can't get the universe to be shared either between the PC and the Xbox platforms. So we wanted to split these things up and give people a chance to interact with different characters. So there's not just one opportunity to be caught in the right instance. There's several. And all of these people are acting kind of not independently because they're sharing some objectives, but if you don't catch one, you've got a chance of catching the others, and that helps us to get around some of the instancing, at least the opportunities as well. We're putting this in open mode, which no matter which mode I was going to choose was always going to be controversial. But open gives me the ability to basically say, everybody has an equal opportunity to try to be involved in the event. Obviously, I put it in solo mode, it would just be me.
Just you on your own, yeah.
So that's not going to work. If I put it in private mode, then I've got to manage people in and out, and that gets controversial as well. Plus, that's an overhead that I could probably just do without.
Yeah, and there's always a chance people might not know about the private group.
And that's exactly, it's just another piece of admin to kind of sort out. And so open is really the only choice for a community event of this type. Now, we have watched previous streams and events online and tried to learn the lessons of what's gone wrong in those. Clearly, one of the big problems is getting instantly killed.
Yes, might be losing a character or two.
And that is a distinct possibility. Now, I've got some very clever people who've been helping me with the whole kind of PvP and defense against PvP stuff in order to try and mitigate that kind of risk of kind of insta destruction, and some very clever work's gone into that. Whether it will be successful or not, only time will tell. But a lot of work has been done to try and cope with that. We're not just dumping a bunch of players into open and hoping for the best. We have come up with a strategic plan, which basically what we've done is we've looked at the odds, we've looked at the task, and we've tried to, within the confines of the game, use every technique that we can, which is a valid in-game technique. We're not going to be doing any combat logging or anything dodgy like that, but anything that's valid within the game that we can get away with, we will employ to achieve our mission. And if players help us, great. If players attempt to stop us and they fail, great. If players attempt to stop us and they're successful and we all die, then that's the way the story turns out. So I said right at the beginning with this book, I wanted this story to be written by the players. And as we're getting into the end stages of that book and this kind of story arc, this is, I suppose, my attempt at doing a kind of Star Wars trench run in Elite Dangerous. We have to finish. A book has to finish with a bit of a bang. Yeah. And I wanted that to be something that the players could be part of. So, it may go horribly wrong. I hope it doesn't.
Well, it's nice to hear so much planning has gone into it.
Yeah, we've done a lot.
To try and prevent any of the obvious problems.
That's right. So we've done a lot of planning. There are multiple characters and multiple kind of points along the way where people will have a chance to interact with us. There will be information and misinformation coming out about it, which is an attempt to allow people to kind of try and use their heads as to what's going on and try and work that out, both in game and kind of out of game as to what their objective is. You've clearly got the setup now with the Galnet articles and the bounties and various other things that have been discovered recently in the game. But to kind of segue onto the second question, I have no predetermined outcome here. I've had to prepare some stuff for the event in the outcomes that various people are killed or various people survive, and there are obviously bits and pieces in the game itself which are kind of prepped to go one way or the other depending on what occurs. But it is quite possible that something will come along that I don't foresee, and I shall be having to sort of conduct the characters in real time at that point to say, okay, well, given that's happened, this is how your character should therefore react, and here are your role play instructions. So I'm hoping it's going to be quite a dynamic event. I've tried to prep for quite a few eventualities, but I'm hoping actually sort of that the players will come up with something that I haven't even thought of. In which
That's
case,
going to be interesting.
We're going to have to react on the fly. And again,
sounds like you're going to need to be quite flexible.
Yes, indeed. And and whatever the outcome is, the players will have made it. The combined actions of all the players, and by players I mean everybody. In open mode, everybody's a role player, regardless of whether you think you're a griefer or a pirate or a bounty hunter or an explorer or a combat pilot. Everyone's a role player as far as I'm concerned in that mode, and everything is valid.
Well, okay, that kind of answers some of the next questions, actually. The other part of the question there were, have you taken into account the number of non-role players in the game? Yet, I guess, as you say, everyone's actually playing a role just by playing the game.
In open mode, that's the way I see it. I actually changed my mind on this over the last kind of couple of years of playing, because when I first ventured into open mode, one of the first things that happened to me on the way out to see the barnacles was somebody just materialized in the same instance as me. I opened comms to them and said hello. Their weapons came out and they destroyed me.
Yeah.
And I was a bit miffed at that, to be honest, because I just spent most of the evening flying out to Meropa,
Trying to get there.
And I was back at my station back in the bubble thinking, that was great. That wasn't a great piece of gameplay. So I went on the forums and I complained about it. Everyone then told me to kind of get good.
Yep.
And when I thought about it, I thought, actually, no, I was dumb, because I went out there unprepared in open mode. And if I encounter another ship, I should have been more suspicious. And maybe I should have backed away, and maybe I shouldn't have just wandered up with my shields down and my weapons stowed. And I got what I deserved. So I kind of thought, actually, it's me who's got the problem here. I'm not looking at open mode in the right way. And so I changed my mind. So when I venture into open mode down, I do occasionally, and I was recently killed. Actually, I was killed during the Prism CG recently. I got PvP'd by somebody who had a kind of engineered Uber railgun.
Oh dear!
And took my ship out in 2 shots.
Probably dead instantly. Yeah.
And I remember thinking, okay, well that's different. I'll have to think of it. And then I was quite surprised, because my ship was engineered and it had quite good shields, but it was kind of insta death almost. Yeah. And I remember thinking, okay, well I've got some lessons to learn there as well. But again, I was not paying attention. I was kind of in my sort of solo mode kind of gameplay in my head. And a player killed me. And hey, well, you got to take the rough with the smooth.
That was I actually made a very similar mistake when I first went out to the barnacles, went there in open, and left my ship there and was driving around in the SRV, having a close up of the barnacles. Here's some shooting, and turn around and see my ship's been blown up. So they didn't think to dismiss my ship, just thought I'd leave it sitting there.
Yes,
and that was that. Yeah,
you've got to treat open mode as kind of quite realistic, haven't you? It's a bit brutal out there, and
that's it.
And I think so. For this event, we're doing it in open mode, completely cognizant of the fact that we're running a major risk. And I've made a decision that if my characters are killed, we're effectively playing in Iron Man mode. They are dead, and that is the law. So some people may say, no, don't do that, because what happens if they die? You say, well, if they die, it'll be a tragic death, and the universe will be that little bit poorer for it, and the story will not go the way that the people who wanted that character to be alive, will go. It's those are the stakes. So I'm hoping that sort of ratchets up the tension a bit. And makes people go, actually, no, I want to try and do something here. Whatever I can do
to have an impact.
I want to see if I can have an impact. So that's ultimately the nature of the game.
Yeah. Did you actually have any personal preference to how it should go, or?
I suppose I have got a bit of a personal preference, but I think I worked out about 4 different endings now, and all of them are quite cool from a writing perspective. And I've got ways that I can incorporate, the death or the survival or the whatever it happens to be into a good story. So I'm not worried from a writing perspective whether or not I can make it make sense in the book. I think some people are going to go, oh my God, if the worst happens.
Yeah.
And then the lead up to that point in the book will be that much more poignant, because you'll know part of the outcome, but you won't know what brought all the people to that point and why they made those decisions. So I think that'll make for quite an interesting gameplay.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, moving on then. Captain Dave P. He says, how has writing this unique book been different to your previous writings?
It's been an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
It's probably been one of the most stressful projects I've ever done, compared to writing an ordinary book, which is no mean feat, to be honest. But I'm possibly a little bit blasé about that now, because I've done that a few times. This has been so much harder, because I'm trying to write a story that's sort of going along in real time with events in the game, trying to contribute some of my own material into the game at the same time to kind of line up with the story and allow players to interact with mysteries and so on and so forth. Frontier's obviously been really, really helpful in adding bits and pieces into the game and moving things around and sorting things out on my behalf to make sure that works. But they've got their own story elements, which of course they're working on, so I've got to be very careful I don't tread over anything they do. So there's a massive amount of approval cycles and all that kind of good stuff in there. And occasionally, of course, we run into bugs as well, which means you're suddenly thinking, that story element isn't going to work for another month because they can't put it out because of release schedules and sorts of stuff. So you're sort of going, now what do we do?
Yeah, now what?
And so you have to write extra stuff that kind of explains that away, or put a Galnet article out that kind of hopefully covers the delay a little bit, and then sometimes that screws up something else further down the line, and going backwards and forwards through the book in order to try and make that make sense without making it look like, oh, hang on a minute, why has Drew added this bizarre chapter in here to make, you see, that's where the bug came in again. You're trying to even all that sort of stuff out and make it kind of cohesive. So and there's no real, I tried at the beginning to kind of anticipate some of the problems I'd encounter, and I got a few of them, but there's no real guide to how to do this.
No, it's not like it's done all the time, is it?
No, it's right. And I'm a member of a few writers groups on Facebook, and when I said what I was doing, and then indicated some of the problems I was running into as a result, a couple of people basically said, well, rather you than me. which was sort of cold comfort, really. It wasn't very helpful. So it's been massively, it's been a challenge. It's been very, very difficult, but it's been huge fun. There's been some huge highs and lows throughout this project. I'm quite relieved I'm getting to the end of it now, to be honest. I think I need a bit of a break, but
probably seems quite long.
Yeah, I mean, I started writing it in August, and some of the setup went way back before then, of course. So it's been pretty full on. Every spare moment of time I've had for the last, kind of almost since 2012, to be honest, has been occupied either writing some of my own books or more likely writing something to do with Elite. So this isn't my main job. It would be a little bit easier if it was, but I'm doing this outside of a normal, fairly heavy, tough 9-to-5 job myself. So it's I'm quite looking forward to a holiday, actually.
Yeah. You certainly have had to be pretty committed in that case.
Yeah, committed or mad, one or other.
Well, one leads into the other.
Yeah, probably, yes. I think I'll go mad, then I'll be committed. Yeah.
Right. If your characters were all killed on the 29th, what will happen with the things they're planning to reveal? I mean, the promotional material is obviously, it's indicating that some secrets are going to be revealed potentially. So if all the characters end up dead, what happens to any secrets they hold? Well,
that is an interesting problem, of course, which is one that I have considered. The route to finding things out will clearly not be as easy, because these characters, for whatever reason that has gone before, which of course I know because I've written the book, are in a privileged position with that knowledge at this point in time. If they all die, then that opportunity to learn about what's going on is lost. However, I'm conscious from a kind of gameplay perspective that we need to offer an alternative way to find that sort of stuff out. So I have considered that, and there will be routes available. So so I've considered that particular problem quite at some length, because obviously if everyone's dead, then there's nobody to tell. Dead men tell no tales, do they? But from a gameplay perspective, that's not an ideal kind of ending. Oh, everybody died.
Yeah, not be too good.
But what about oh, that's it. Game over.
Yeah, the forums erupt.
So I don't think that will be very popular somehow. Even though you could argue that's the realistic, gritty end if that is the outcome. I don't think that's very emotionally satisfying. So I have got some mechanisms that I built in for stuff to come out, but it may require players to do some other things in order to find that kind of stuff out.
Sure, I see. So it's not a case that all will suddenly be lost.
No, I mean, it's definitely something I've considered. One of the first questions I had to answer, well, what if? That's probably one of the first questions I answered. What if everybody dies? What happens? Yeah. Because does what? And given that players have been playing this game for a while, and this mystery's been going on for quite a long time, to just get to a point and then some griefer turns up and kills everybody. Yeah. Probably, it might be realistic, but it's not a very satisfying story, is it? And I don't really want to write that into the end of the book in that sort of way. So
I understand that.
I've given some thought to how stuff can come out. If unfortunately nobody makes it through.
Rend asks us the next question, saying, how do you think Frontier could go about better engaging players with a sense of understanding the lore and agency of the game without making them feel like contrived snowflakes? Or do you feel that Frontier already achieved that sufficiently?
Not quite sure what I mean by snowflakes there. Do you know what that is?
I think they're getting that, making them feel like they're the hero of the story, I guess.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean it's a very difficult thing to avoid. I mean, one of the challenges you have in storytelling in an MMO environment is that you can put in a piece of content that maybe and we've seen it time and time again, haven't we? The first person who discovers it goes, "Ooh, I found something," and everyone goes, "Hey, rah!" And then everybody else's experience of that is a YouTube video, isn't it? And while that's kind of okay, it's everybody wants to be the person who discovers the thing. And that's not easy to avoid, and it's not realistic to avoid in a multi-user scenario. There's no real way around that. So I think things like Frontier have done, like the little lore beacons, which give you little tidbits of information, those are quite nice. And I think if they can kind of multi-chain missions in some way that are related to the actions of minor factions and the BGS, i.e., if your minor faction in one system starts a war with another faction in another system, and then missions are generated off the back of that war, I think that stuff like that, which I'm sure they're kind of working on, multi-chain missions that are kind of BGS led, would help to kind of give you that sense of actually I'm involved in something. And as this war progresses, if the war goes badly, then the mission tone changes to we're desperate now, we need those weapons, otherwise we're going to lose this war. That sort of stuff would make people feel like they're actually contributing a bit more. In terms of the lore, I would love to see a coffee table book about Elite Dangerous in terms of the lore. I'd also like to sort of see an Encyclopedia Galactica in the game that you could kind of just type in, in your holofact screen in your ship. You could just
that'd be really nice.
In, okay, who's this Kahina woman, for example? Just type it, you get a potted history of a character pop up on the screen, and you go, oh, okay, that's who it is. That's just a time thing. Alas, you could do that, but maybe the game wouldn't move on for 6 months.
Yes, I
I don't have the list of features that the devs are working on. I don't know if something like that is even planned, but I know they have a massive list, and somebody senior in Frontier is making judgment calls on what the devs work on at any given point in time, or which features happen at which order. And we've seen Frontier kind of do a this kind of building block technique to features, which they build in a base level of functionality and then slowly enhance it, and that's the way they've chosen to develop Elite Dangerous, which I think is pretty pragmatic. It does mean that things get better over time, but it does mean that when a feature first arrives, it maybe isn't as fleshed out as people would like it to be. And I think that applies at all sorts of levels in the game. Now, the alternative to that is you do everything, which is kind of more the sort of Star Citizen model, I suppose. And the game is in a perennial state of
you're always waiting for the content.
Almost, it's almost here kind of thing. In hindsight, we've had a game for 4 years that we've been playing and having great fun with. Star Citizen doesn't have that at this point in time. Those are different choices, different ways of producing things. And on balance, I think what Frontier have done is very pragmatic. It's not perfect, but hey, it's not a perfect world.
But it's working, isn't it?
That's right. There's only limited, there's a finite amount of dev resource, and that's it, really. The art of the possible is the art of the possible.
Well, it certainly seems to be a direction that Frontier are actually heading in. As you started mentioning earlier about chained missions, I think that's something they've been changing recently over the past few patches, and it seems to be a direction they're aiming towards.
Yes, and I think if they can crank up the procedural generation of clever content in those areas as well, then they'll end up with something pretty special. But we'd all like it to be now, wouldn't we? The funny thing is, I was watching the Frontier version 2.3 kind of release stream that they did from Frontier, and you could see a little bit of tetchiness from the producers, the presenters on the stream, because everybody was asking what's coming in 2.4 and 3.0, and they say, well, no, we're here to talk about 2.3.
This is not about that. Yeah.
And it's like everybody always wants the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, and it's like, well, let's just enjoy where we are. But we will get there. We know that space legs are coming, and we know that planetary landings with atmospheres will come. But we're not there yet.
I'm sure that the developers would love to talk about some of that stuff, but I guess their hands are tied from doing so.
Yeah. And the Frontier are rightly cagey about stuff that's further in the future than the immediate next release, because it probably isn't all set in stone at this point.
Yeah.
And you've got to be a bit careful about that.
No, definitely. Well, I think we've probably got a bit of an answer to this one already, or can guess an answer from what you've said already. But are you going to be in the game on the 29th, or are you going to be observing the event?
I will be doing a bit of both, actually. So, yes, I am involved, but I will be spending a fair bit of time dishing out instructions, I imagine.
Okay, then. A bit going on.
Yes, indeed, yes.
Okay, next question. When will Stroop Waffles be a commodity in-game, or would you like to see them as a commodity in-game? Waffles.
No guesses for who that question is from. I think they should be a rare good, actually. I think we should have a station in Belgium, or a Belgium-named station, maybe the Antwerp station or something like that, where Stroop Waffles are a rare goods, and we can ferry them around the galaxy. That'd be awesome.
Great answer. Next question. What has been the biggest challenge of writing Premonition?
Biggest challenge has really been trying to maintain a manuscript which the players can change and influence. And, I've also ended up with more characters than I think would normally be in a novel of this size, by nature of the fact that lots of people have got involved, which is cool. But it does give you a problem as a writer to say, how can you do justice to an awful lot of people without making it kind of little bit parts? Oh, so-and-so turned up in a spaceship and landed and then walked past the camera kind of thing. So finding a balance between that has been very, very difficult, because I want characters in the book that are interesting for people to read, and if possible, interesting for people to read who don't actually know that much about Elite at all. I'd like it to stand up as a sci-fi novel in its own regard, which is something I did for the first book. Yeah, so
Reclamation certainly does stand out like that.
So it's been much harder with this one to do that, because you've got some commanders who will probably be quite recognisable to the Elite community, but won't be any different to anybody else in the book from a perspective of somebody who's not familiar with the Elite community. And by that I mean anybody who's either not heard of Elite or just plays Elite and doesn't really get involved in a lot of the online stuff. They wouldn't necessarily know somebody from somewhere else. So you've got to, I've been at pains when I've selected people to be in the book to say, look, I need some bio on your character, some background and where they come from and stuff, so I can kind of weave them in a little bit. To make them a little bit more interesting, because otherwise it's just Commander so-and-so in a spaceship.
And that's I can understand wanting to
that's not very interesting in a book. You've got to have and some interesting backstory. So I've tended to favour people a little bit who've thought about their character a little bit more and tend to be more on the role-playing side, because it just makes for a better book.
Yeah, they can already offer you some context.
Exactly. And if they've done something interesting in the game, that's at least relatable to the story, because there's some fantastic stuff. I mean, there was that chap who madly flew out. I think it was madly flew out to Colonia in a Sidewinder and stuff like this. And I thought that was fantastic. And there was that chap who kind of fuel ratted across space to rescue somebody stranded on the arse end of nowhere, and it took 20 hours to get there. Brilliant stories, but absolutely no use to me, because I could put that in the book, but it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't mean anything to the overall story. It has, and that's sort of the problem that I've had when I've come to kind of put everything together, is it's got to flow in a direction. So every secondary character arc, there has to be a reason for them to be there. So that means they need to be introduced, and they need to kind of exit the stage having done something, not crucial but significant in the story, which means I can't just have somebody turn up, fire a few lasers, and then sod off.
That's it. Yeah, you've got to make sure it's not disjointed in the end.
Exactly, and that is proving hard. But and the other thing that's really, really difficult is I've had to be brutal in editing. I'm already at 140,000 words, which is too long, to be honest, for a book of this type. And which means I've probably got to cut out at least another 10,000 words somewhere along the line. And I haven't written the last chapter yet. So, I'm going to have to be utterly brutal come editing, and there will inevitably then be cool stuff that has been in the book up until now, which I'm going to have to dump, because it's the book can't be too long. It has to be has
a bit of a shame.
Yeah, so maybe there'll be a cutting room floor version or something. So it's already a lot longer than Reclamation was, and I haven't done the last chapter, and I need to be a bit wary of that. So the editing. The editing cut is going to be very painful. It already has been, because I've had to dump some stuff out that I really wanted to keep. But in the cold light of day, I have to measure every single paragraph and every single word against, does this tell the story of Elite Dangerous? And if it's at all tangential, it just doesn't have a justification to stay in the book. And that's really hard, because there will be some people that get disappointed as a result, and I know that already. But I have to do it for the benefit of the book and the overall thing that I'm trying to do. And at the end of the day, at the end of the day, I'm doing this as a thing for Frontier. So it needs to be, it's a book I'm writing ultimately. So it needs to be a book that works.
Yeah, and it's got to be right, hasn't it?
It's got to be right. Yep. So that's been really hard. That's been really hard.
How do you think the experience with everything that's been going on so far, I guess with the creation of the events leading up to now, and eventually the event on the 29th, would influence the way Frontier approaches player-created content in the future? Do you think that's something you can answer, really? Or
it's a difficult one. I mean, Frontier certainly watches very closely what players do, and when they discover things and how they interact with things, and they don't often comment on the forums, and they don't often comment on Reddit and Twitter, but they are watching all the time. So that might sound a bit big brothery, but they're generally interested in just doing a better job next time round. And there have been mistakes. We've seen bugs, and we've seen in-game events that didn't quite work, and we've seen CGs that didn't quite work, and we've seen problems with the background simulation that didn't quite work, and the power play has gone wrong on occasion. All of these things happen, and Frontier wants to make things better. Who doesn't want to make things better? So they do observe these things, and they've certainly asked me a few times about what my views are on how things work that I've done, and I'd been critical of them in the past, a while back, and probably without appreciating some of the difficulties that they faced. I'm much wiser than that now. So it's having kind of, if you like, being behind the magic curtain, like it's
just difficult to know without actually seeing that yourself.
So hard, hard, and I put up with this every so often. Something of mine crops up in the game, and I get a bit of flack here and a bit of a lot of praise, to be honest, which is really nice. But you get critical people, and people are entitled to have critical thoughts. Nothing wrong with that. But the devs must put up with it every single day. Elite Dangerous is crap, and why aren't they sorting this out? And God, they don't know what they're doing, and day in, day out, they get flack.
It's got to be hard, yeah.
I don't know how they cope with it, to be honest.
Well,
I think you just kind of if you're in the world of game development, you just have to develop a really thick skin.
Part of it, yeah.
Yep.
What is your reaction when you hear players talk about the Children of Raxler player group getting special treatment?
That one is, that one's quite interesting. I think it's a case of people don't know the background to that one. Is after the events of Reclamation, there were a few Galnet articles that I put into Frontier just to kind of close down the sort of Kahina Salome story arc at the time, because at that point in time, we didn't know that we were doing any more books, and Frontier we were really busy with getting the version 2.0 of the game out at the time, so there weren't spare resources to even look at books and stuff, and there's lots of other stuff going on at the time. So in order to kind of just keep things tickling along, some various Galnet articles were being put into that place. But the Children of Raxler basically said to me, could we, as our faction is just starting out, could, and if Salome is not doing anything active at this point in game, which at that particular time she wasn't, and there was no new book on the horizon at the moment, and it was unsure back then whether or not there would be, they basically said, could we adopt her as our leader? And I said, well, that's quite a cool idea. What do you mean by that? And they said, well, we're looking to do these sort of things in game where we're exploration focused and so on and so forth. And so we basically came to arrangement to say, yes, we can come up with a in-game way that makes sense. And they approached me with that proposal. We kicked it about quite a bit, and a few months later, then we came up with a story that kind of defined the way that the Children of Axla started off. And we put that in game, and it became a piece of lore. Now, they didn't have to do that. I didn't have to say yes, but because they got involved and tried to effectively write their own story in the game, then they adopted Salome. So as part of that, her actions influenced them, and their actions influence her. So you could argue they've got a privileged position. We work very hard to make sure they don't get insider knowledge about anything that's coming up, because obviously that wouldn't be fair. But it's because they, basically got off their backsides collectively and asked to get involved with Salome back then, that they're in the position that they are now. And that applies to quite a few other player groups, actually, who've adopted some of my characters as part of their lore, if you like. And quite a lot of other player groups have got, have adopted other characters from the lore as well. I mean, for example, DJ Truthsayer's Sovereignty has adopted Harold, who is the arguably the rightful emperor of the empire. So they've adopted him as a figurehead now, and they're trying to put him back on the throne. They're writing their own stories and adopting characters. They sought out Frontier's permission for that one, and Frontier said, you go for it. Can't guarantee you'll be successful, but write your own story, blaze your own trail. And so my response to people saying Children of Axla have got a privileged position, no, that's baloney. The reason they're in that position is they did blaze their own trail. They wrote their own story. They maybe were a bit cheeky in asking, but if you don't ask, you don't get. So they took that step, and they're reaping the rewards as a result.
Well, the fact that the possibility even exists for doing that is a pretty good one.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. You can go, actually, maybe I'll try to do this crazy thing. There's a lady called Scarlet at the moment, which many of you may be familiar with as well, who started off a protest against the Recon Corporation over some stuff that had been going wrong with that entity in the lore, and now she's found herself in charge of a massive fleet of warships, which is not what she planned. But there's another piece of story that's player generated, which is kicking off, which will have ramifications and and stuff. And that's exactly, I think, what Frontier are aiming at. So if people want to be in a position where perhaps ultimately they're seen as having a bit of privilege, well, what you've got to look at is that 18 months, 2 years of hard work in terms of getting your faction off the ground, getting yourself organized, getting yourself a Discord channel, getting yourself a website, all that stuff has happened to that point. None of these factions have become an overnight success just because somebody waved a magic wand in the lore. They've done the hard graft to get themselves to the place where they are. They've invested time in the game. They've invested time in their community and their faction and their lore. And people like me and people like Frontier have responded to that when we've been asked to. So blaze your own trail, guys.
We've learned quite a bit about how the Federation and the Empire fight their Cold Wars. As a writer and a storyteller, what is your vision about the Alliance and how it should react to the Cold Wars? And what would perhaps be the most fun for you from a writer's perspective?
I've got to be a bit careful on this one.
All right.
The Alliance does feature in my book, and so I'm kind of in a bit of a no spoiler situation. But what I will say is that I think the Alliance is as we say at work, boxing clever. They are, they know they're not as strong as the Empire, and they know they're not as strong as the Federation. So if you're the underdog, you watch and wait for your opportunity. So let's leave it at that.
That's what you're going to say. Okay. That's really quite a good answer. If they made a movie of Elite Premonition, who would you like to see cast in the role of Salome?
Oh, well, that's a tricky question. I think it would be a cross between, Michelle Dockery from, she's probably best known from Downton Abbey.
Oh, yes. Yep.
So, slightly arrogant, upper class, kind of posh, but heart sort of in the right place kind of person. That's a bit Salome. The other person I think would be quite good would be Anne Hathaway, who's got that slightly more kind of gentle side, which is more Salome than it is Kahina, I suppose. So somewhere between those two actresses, I think, would be about right for Salome.
How much of the Formidine Rift mystery has been solved? Is that something you can give an answer on? Whether settlement's a thing? Says a question, and it goes on to a couple of other questions. I'll ask them in just a moment. So yeah, can you give an indication on
how
whereabouts we are with the Formidine Rift mystery?
It depends on how you measure it. It is connected to other events in the story of Elite Dangerous, so it won't necessarily be completed by the actions on the 29th. However, what players have recently discovered and what will occur on the 29th will kind of be the bit of the Formidine Rift that has been alluded to from Reclamation, if that makes sense. So the old lady in the hospital in that book kicked this thing off by kind of making this offhand mention to this strange place in the depths of space where bad stuff was happening, and we're now beginning to understand what that bad stuff was. And obviously Salome has uncovered something and she wants to tell the galaxy about that, which is what the 29th is. Now that event will occur and that revelation hopefully will happen. And then you could argue that arc of the story is kind of done and it's a setup for whatever happens next. But the ramifications of that will probably echo on for quite some time, and will impact what happens with various stuff that Frontier's coming up with, in the next few months and years. Events don't just stop because we reach the end of a particular point. So the reason it probably feels a tiny bit contrived at the moment to players, and I understand that criticism, is that certain things have to happen in order for me to finish this book. And a book needs to have an ending, and I want players to be part of that, but the fact that the book is about in-game events does mean that certain things have to kind of slot in at certain time, which there's no way not to make that feel contrived, really. I've done my best to try and make that as smooth as possible, but it's a criticism which I acknowledge. The book needs to have a beginning, middle, and an end in a kind of classic sort of book-telling sense. But the story of Elite Dangerous certainly doesn't stop. And what the Formidine Rift mystery actually means to the players, and their relationships with everybody else, and the stance they take on learning what's kind of behind all this, even in part, depending on the outcome of the 29th, will influence their choices as new content begins to trickle in over the next few kind of weeks, months, and years. So I can't give you have completed 88% of the quest number, but
we get it. It gives an idea.
It gives you an idea, hopefully.
Yeah. I think even in the book Elite Reclamation, it was only really a few lines, wasn't it, from the old lady or Rebecca, who alluded to the Formidine Rift. But even with that, she gave the impression that it was a part of something much bigger, and that even if someone was to go out and have a look at exactly what she was talking about, there'd be something more to it beyond that.
The thing is that what the old lady and obviously now Salome and all the players are involved in is something that's been in game carrying on for an awfully long time. So it stretches back into the past, and those responsible for what's going on are still active today. The players don't know who they are, and they don't know what they're trying to achieve at this point in time. But those things are still happening now. If Salome reveals it, they may decide to do one thing. If Salome dies, they may decide to do everything else. But regardless of what happens on the 29th, those individuals and that plan will adapt and continue. So, the Rift mystery, if you like, may be explained and kind of, you could argue it was solved, but its impact will continue to reverberate. And players can decide what they want to do, of course, in response to that. So if when they understand what's been going on to a degree, they can take that knowledge and they can ignore it. They can just keep playing the game as per usual, or they can decide to do stuff. And I definitely encourage factions and powers out there to do stuff. Make a protest, start a war. Whatever you think is appropriate based on what you've learned. Go in the game and blaze your own trail, because that's kind of what we want. We want people to react and go, "No, it's not acceptable. We won't stand for this."
It sounds like it's going to be interesting then. Yeah,
yep.
Look forward to it. Has Frontier ever incorporated any of your lore from your Oolite books?
Not that I'm aware. No, I mean you've got to be very careful with IP stuff like that, and the Olite is open source, and I think as long as Olite stayed sensibly disconnected from Elite Dangerous, it's in a safe place, and you don't really want to incorporate content from that kind of stuff. Having said that, I did notice the star system Tianve was in the game, and I don't know if that was by design or by accident or just out of coincidence, but it's an odd inclusion, because Tianve was in the original Elite and thus was in Olite, but in the original Elite it was an irrelevant planet, irrelevant system. It was a long way away from the core world, of no interest at all. But in Olite it had a lot more significance. So they might have just knocked that in just to sort of say hi. I don't really know, but it's when I found it in game, I was like, oh, that's odd. Why is that system there? Because there's no particular reason for it to be there, but it is there. So if you go to the system, it's Tianve, Tianve, or how you pronounce it. It's an original system from the original Elite game, and it did feature quite significantly in Elite. So you never know. I think Frontier are certainly aware of all those fan remake games that came along in the gaps between the official Elite outings. I don't think they can kind of publicly officially acknowledge any of those sort of things, but we know that Frontier is very keen on kind of putting nods in for the fans and doing various other bits and pieces. I wouldn't be surprised if things like that had happened.
There seems to be a lot of little things like that, and I suppose what you could call Easter eggs dotted all throughout the galaxy.
We've seen homages to famous people who passed on. We've seen little nods to famous scientists, and all sorts of little bits and pieces are in there, aren't there? So there's certainly space for that sort of stuff.
You might not be able to answer the next question one way or the other, really, but do the Thargoids have anything to do with any of your stuff, or is that a separate story thread?
I am definitely not at liberty to comment about the Thargoids.
One way or the other. Okay,
I'm afraid that is definitely off limits at the moment. So you're going to have to just keep watching the game, I think, for that.
If someone was from Frontier was here, probably Ed, he'd say there is no Thargoids.
Well, actually, yes, that's true. I mean, that's one thing that's worth pointing out, is that these alien ships have turned up, and yes, they're green, and yes, they've got 8 sides, but there's no indication that they're the same aliens that are kind of rumoured to have been around hundreds of years before in the history of Elite Dangerous. They don't look anything like their kind of wireframe models that we had way back when. Are they the same aliens? Did the Thargoids ever exist? And actually, the word Thargoid is a human word for a species of alien that may have been encountered a long time ago. So it's all a bit mysterious right now. We don't know anything for sure.
Could mean anything then.
It could indeed, yeah.
Yeah. In the current state of the game, is the Rift mystery solvable or still just findable? I'm not really sure. I think you've kind of answered that, haven't you, in a way?
Yeah, I mean, there's been quite a bit of talk over the last few days about, you said it wasn't a POI, and we found this POI, and well, the Rift mystery isn't a POI. If anything, the Rift mystery is the events of that the old woman and Salome have kind of found, and players are trying to figure out what's actually behind all that. That's the mystery, if you like. There are POIs, of course, which tell you stuff, because you need to communicate that in game. It's no use just.
Yeah, that's the nature of the game itself, isn't it? It's the way the game is structured.
At the end of the day, if it's not a POI, then you can't go visit it, can you?
That's it.
So there are POIs as part of that, and some of those POIs are bigger and more significant than others. And again, that's the nature of the game. But the Formidine Rift mystery is all about what's effectively being concealed. There's clearly some sort of plan afoot. There was clearly some sort of mission 30 years ago that's all been covered up. Why and so what and by who is I would say that's what the Formidine Rift mystery actually is. But obviously the Formidine Rift is a physical location in space now that we've all had confirmed,
which is a part of it. Yeah,
which is a big part of it. It's it's the answer to that riddle in the book. The Riort Ridquat line. There was something at the end of that line, and players have now located it. So and that basically has sent them back to the core.
It's another chapter, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Another step along the way.
Based on the logs that were found on the ship. Now the logs that were found in the abandoned settlements and the beacons and so forth were all set in the same year, so those events were kind of concurrent. But the logs that the old lady left, Rebecca in this case, were 3 years later on. So that gives you an idea of the sort of time spans that we're dealing with.
Sure.
The impact of that. You've also seen the old lady, if people have been following it, she did pop up in Galnet relatively recently, in the last year or so, when I've been adding those bits of the story into Galnet as well. So, if you put all those things together, you will get a timeline and a pattern, and you'll start making some sense of it. And hopefully on the 29th, more stuff will come as well.
It'll make even more sense. I noticed in the Formidine forum thread, you mentioned about the mega ship, that it was upgraded, or that part of the puzzle or the Rift mystery was upgraded for the 2.3 update. Yep. Are you able at all to mention what was there previously?
Well, we had this question yesterday actually on the DJ Tuesday stream. The view was taken, that as the game improves, then certain stuff can get kind of retrofitted with newer stuff. So ship models and various other bits and pieces, as they become available, can improve the content. The Rift mystery hasn't changed as a result of those sort of things. The logs are still the logs, so the answers are still the answer. It's just the experience of finding them out is effectively improved. Yeah. And when to go back to another question, I said quite clearly, you don't need horizons to solve this. Well, that's true, you don't, but it seemed madness not, and I didn't know about horizons, of course, back when Gamma was out. It wasn't even a thing. It seemed madness not to take advantage of the fact that the game is improving in leaps and bounds on the way through, and going back to some of the stuff and going, actually, no, we can make that better now. And Frontier, one of the devs I was speaking to said, look, we've got an opportunity to use a mega ship for this, and we can also use one of the first instances of actual voice actors putting logs into the game rather than just having the static text. Would you like to do that? And
You're not going to say no,
it would be daft to say no, wouldn't it? I mean, who would say no to that? So yes, I understand the accusation that you've changed it to adjust it, and and to be honest, some things have been adjusted because of player actions and various other bits and pieces that have occurred. It's very difficult to keep a static thing in place over that sort of time period, because technology changes and things change and all sorts of things happen. But the essence of the Formidine Rift mystery is exactly as it was, as I kind of penned it, coming out of the back of Elite Reclamation, and that's what players are on the verge of figuring out. The clues are there to point you in the right direction to, ultimately, yes, there are some POIs in there, but the essence is to try and unravel this sort of shadowy conspiracy that's now beginning to be unmasked in the game, which will lead players to other revelations in weeks and months and years to come.
Yeah, I mean, there's been hints. There's been a conspiracy all along, really. I've mentioned it more than once in a few of my videos. There's something I've picked up on anyway. So,
well, certainly when you realise that we've had wide-scale lore articles on things like the missing, ships that disappeared off into the darkness and never came back. Well, here's an example of something a little bit more specific in the lore of the missing. Looks like these guys were sent out to do something and they weren't expected to come back, which is and so somebody has bankrolled that expedition. Somebody callously has decided that all the lives on those starships were less important than whatever the outcome of the mission
was.
Whatever
their agenda was.
You've got to be asking yourself, well, who the hell are they and why? And that's the kind of the mystery. That's the story.
Yeah, sounding good. Are you going to be going to LaveCon this year?
I don't know, actually. I got a feeling my holiday clashes with it this year. I'd like to get along to the conventions, but unfortunately they do tend to often be in the school holidays.
Yeah, those things are difficult to fit in, aren't they?
Being on holiday, I try and get to as many conventions as I can because I like to meet people in person, but I'm not sure at the moment. I shall do my best.
Okay, I'd like to go myself, but likewise I don't know if I'll be able to make it there this year. Right, got a really serious question here, Drew. How'd you like your steak cooked?
Oh, medium rare. I'm not a fan of overcooked steak. No, it has to be done properly. Yeah.
Similar to me then.
Yeah, good for you as well. That's civilized. Yeah.
There's another question relating to Thargoids and if their appearance might affect future weaponry, but I don't think you're going to be able to talk about Thargoids.
Yeah, I mean, well, we have to caveat that straight away with alien ships at this point in time, don't we?
Yes, again.
So, I mean, the only thing I would offer on that is having seen the alien ships, and yes, if we step outside the kind of immersed aspect of the game, we know they're cutscenes. But, if you just go with it for the moment, they seem worryingly impervious to our weapons at this point in time, don't they? So I know a few people have tried to attack them with zero success as far as I've been able to see.
Isn't it?
So
they seem completely indifferent, don't they?
They either seem indifferent and completely invulnerable. So I think that will be quite interesting to see where that goes. Whether that actually means anything or not, I don't know. Until we start seeing, players actually get attacked, if that occurs, and what that kind of looks like. The only observation I would make, and this has got nothing to do with any insider knowledge or not, this is just me speculating, is I find it fascinating that we've suddenly got the ability to engineer our ships up to make them massively more lethal than they used to be.
I've always wondered about that.
Just in time for these aliens to start showing up on the edge of space.
Yes, might be quite powerful. Going to need some engineered ships, perhaps.
Exactly, and that's not me talking as somebody with any knowledge of what Frontier's up to. No, that's just an observation.
Random thought. Yeah, I've had the same one. How rigid or relaxed has the collaboration with Frontier been in regards to continuity versus creativity?
It's an eternal battle, actually, because while we want to be creative as much as possible, you've got to you've got to work in the art of the possible, which means only a certain amount of content at a certain amount of time can occur. There is some quite rigid guidelines on what you cannot do. For example, I couldn't magic away the Federation just because I fancied it.
Yeah. Well, that might be fun. But,
so you can't suddenly just completely change the socio-political structure of the universe just to suit the needs of storytelling. So you have to kind of realize that you're playing with quite an established kind of universe. So in that context, your creativity is limited to what is possible within those domains. Now there's an infinite number of stories that can be told inside that, obviously, but there's not so much the galaxy spanning save the universe type story. You can't do that in Elite the way it is, because
that's not really what Elite is it?
Exactly right. That's not what it is. I would actually quite enjoy writing a book that was just about Colonia, for example, because there's a massive amount that could be done out there to do story. That would be a fascinating thing for somebody to develop, I think. So those are all sort of possibilities for it. But you do have to bear in mind the practicalities of what you're doing. So every CG and every Galnet article has to be translated into multiple languages. So that is that means A, it's expensive, B, it's a piece of work, C, it needs a lead time, and therefore it needs to have been checked to be sure it's okay before it's translated. And all of these things effectively become, quite a boring project plan. And if a CG ends one way and then the story goes off, then something that you prepped may therefore be irrelevant. And so you're always juggling those sort of kind of bits and pieces as well. And then bugs and issues crop up, and which cause problems as well. So there's a lot of practical constraints, and ultimately stories need to be approved by David Braben sometimes, because if they influence something that's quite significant about the Elite universe, then they may set a precedent for other events later on. And if you've blown something up in a system, then you can't go back and magically reconstruct it. It's stuff like that. Again. So certain things need to have quite a lot of diligence around them and quite a lot of checking, which inevitably means that they don't move forward as fast as people would like. So it is very collaborative. It is very creative, but it is very controlled as well. It's a combination of all of those things.
Yeah, need to find the right balance with it.
It is, and you don't want sort of magic fairy dust appearing every so often and changing things, and magic unicorns appearing in the story.
Just so.
But you want the unexpected, you want the drama, and you want the kind of crises to occur as well. So it's finding a balance between all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's good to have had some freedom to do that as well. With the upcoming event, is there anything you could recommend people need to prepare for? Do they need a certain type of ship? Do they need any engineering mods or permits? Or
you shouldn't need any permits. No. We did have a look at using permits, but the problem with those is that it automatically puts to use the kind of forum vernacular, it puts things behind a grind wall, doesn't it? Which means that certain players are just going to go, I haven't got time for that, which means I can't access the content, therefore I won't take part. So we kind of avoided kind of permits as a thing. In terms of ships, it really depends on what you want to do. Now, if you want to go in there guns blazing and try and kill our characters, then you're going to have to be prepped for the fight. If you want to be defending or something like that, then maybe a different type of ship. If you want to maybe offer to scout around and keep an eye on what other people are doing, then maybe you need a fast jump capable ship that can go long distances quickly and report back against where the fighters are, which obviously, because they're heavily laden down, they can't jump as far and as fast. So there's all those sort of considerations. It's up to the players. I'm not going to prescribe anything. If you want to take part, decide what you want to do and then build your ship according to that role. Going back to that, I know it sounds like a cliche now, but blaze your own trail. It's your story. You decide how you want to take part.
It sounds like a good approach. It's also nice to know, though, that no permits are needed. So,
yeah, you don't. There's no kind of special privileges required, kind of for this one. It's it's bring as we used to say in the car modding community, kind of run what you brung. It's that sort of thing. I know there's people taking part in Eagles, in Asps, in Cutters, and everything in between. So.
Might be a few sidewinders.
You never know. I'm kind of hoping there will be, actually. That would be quite cool.
It would be, wouldn't it? Enderby wants to know how you go about publishing your books.
The original fan fiction ones I did, which were kind of not-for-profit, I just did myself, so self-published them. And that's actually not a bad process to go through, because it teaches you quite a lot about typesetting and graphics and all sorts of things. It's quite easy to do nowadays through Amazon and various other websites like Smashwords and places like that. So I've definitely done that approach. Some people will be very sniffy about self-published stuff and saying it's not a real book. But
it's different time though now, I think, as well, isn't it?
Yeah, my view on a real book is, did somebody read it and did they enjoy it?
Yeah, exactly.
And if they said so, if they said yes to those questions, then I think you've published a book. Do you need a publisher? You don't need to have one. Is it useful? It certainly is in certain things. It's less useful in others. I mean, when I self-publish a book, which I've done in the past, minus the production costs of whoever you've kind of got to do the heavy work of actually printing the thing, all the profits are yours. Great. From a self-published book, I might be able to recoup 60-70% of my, the revenue. When a publisher's involved, then automatically that number drops quite considerably. But the publisher does promotion, and they just take your Word document and they magically transform it into a book, and then they take all that pain away. And they advertise it here, there, and everywhere, and do lots of other bits and pieces for you as well. So, that is good. And they hold stock for you, so you haven't got to hold it in your house and all that kind of good stuff. And they organise book signings, and they invite you to conventions, and they get you in front of other people, and that's all good stuff. But it means that you're not actually getting so much back for every copy of your book that you've sold. So I've self-published. I have been published by more than one publisher, and in this case, for the next book, Frontier themselves are publishing it. So not a traditional publisher in a sense, so a games company publishing a book, which is quite weird.
Yeah.
So there's no right answer to that question. There's lots of ways to go about it, and it depends on the needs of what you're writing and how you want to move that forward. I'm simply trying to make a name for myself that Drew Wagar writes fun, accessible, kind of cool, dramery, political, sci-fi, fantasy stories, which are quite meaty and interesting, but they're not groundbreaking. They're not cutting edge sci-fi. They're not trying to make a political statement or a sociological statement about the world today. They're just good old fashioned sort of plain fun, escapism. That's kind of my brand, if you like.
Enjoyable books.
Hopefully you know what you're going to get when you read a Drew Wagar book, and that's basically what I'm attempting to do from kind of my own perspective. In much the same way that you've got a very unique style, which is very recognizable for your YouTube videos. There's no point me trying to compete with that. But what I do is I write, I make books. That's what I do. So, and I try to be the best at that I can. And my books, hopefully, people will go, if they like Elite Reclamation, they'll like every single other one of my books, because they kind of know the sort of thing that they're going to be getting, even if they don't know the specifics.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think the Salamay's chances are of surviving the event?
Well, this is an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, when I first came up with this idea, I floated it past Frontier, and the feedback from Frontier was twofold. Ed Lewis said to me, she's going to die. Is that what you want?
Yeah.
Are you trying to kill her? I said, no. Yeah, I think she's good. I think we could. I want to have that go. He said, no, she'll just die. That's what happens in open events. We've tried them lots and lots of times. We just get killed. And they say we'd watched that happen a few times on Frontier live streams and various other bits and pieces.
Yes.
And that has happened, and they sort of had to reincarnate their character slightly awkwardly for the alien ship stuff. which isn't ideal, obviously, from a storytelling perspective. And the other one was, you're not going to do anything illegal, are you? You're not planning on combat logging to make sure people survive. So I said, I was at pains to reassure Frontier. They say, no, we've thought this through quite carefully, and here's what we intend to do. So I sent them our strategy document, and basically compiled by some clever people who will remain nameless for the time being, but they will get credit in the book for all the work they've put in. But I don't want to reveal them now, because that will probably compromise what they're doing. Sure. They've really thought about this problem hard. They've analysed PvP in excruciating detail. I've been very impressed by what they've come up with, actually. And if you start with the assumption that you are going to be griefed, then you have to work back from that. How do you avoid being griefed? What techniques can you use? Now, there's obviously engineering stuff you can do to your ship. There's approaches to refueling that you can take. There's approaches to how you act in supercruise and how you try and avoid interdictions and all those kind of things. There are lots and lots of techniques that you can deploy. Now, we've been working quite hard on that and practicing these techniques and looking at it from an in-depth strategy perspective. And I don't want to give those techniques away, but maybe after the event we can talk about them a little bit more. But we've approached it from the fact that we know what open is like, and these tactics are designed specifically to combat those effects. So, in the words of one Michael Brooks, we're basically just saying, bring it. And if we fail, it's certainly not for lack of really, really trying to do that. And we know the odds are against us, but an awful lot of people have come down on Salome's side, which is great, and an awful lot of people have basically said, no, we are going to try and kill her, and that's cool, because that's there's no better accolade really for a writer than to have a character that some people love and some people hate. I mean, that to me means that I've hit the nail on the head with a character that gets people passionate either for or against. Everybody's got an opinion on Salome and what she's done. Some people think she's a heroine, that she's beyond reproach and whatever she does must be altruistic for the greater good. And some people think she is genuinely a terrorist. And look what she did in prison. She started a war. Everything she's done since has been for her own benefit, and everywhere she goes, she causes chaos and death. So let's get rid of this girl once and for all.
You can see why people are thinking that.
And that's kind of what I was aiming for. You want characters that people go, yeah, okay, let's see what she does next.
No, I think they're the best type of characters.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was aiming for. Trying to make people who are memorable, that people go, yeah, I remember when we were there. Do you remember that? If people when we get to this, if there is a 10-year plan for Elite Dangerous, I don't kind of know where that came from, but I've heard people quote it. If we get to the end of the 10 years and people go, oh, yeah, do you remember back in 2017 when we had that thing when Salome did, whether she lives or dies, we don't know at this point. Let's say she died. Do you remember when Salome died and we found out all that sort of stuff about what was going on? And people go, oh, yeah, that was great. And there's a few people who were around at that time who still playing Elite today. That would be my kind of fondest hope, that this episode that we're in now, that will happen and stuff will happen as a result. We'll fondly remember as a high point in the game, if you like, almost in years to come. So if we achieve that, then I think we've done good.
Yeah, it'd be nice. It certainly sounds like a lot of preparation has gone into it. So
we've been working for several weeks on it now. And the reason, and some people will, and I get it. Some people say, you're just self-promoting and stuff like that. But what we wanted was to put those kind of cryptic clues out to say, basically, save the date. We want as many people to try and take part as possible. That's why we set the videos out weeks ago to say some weird stuff is happening on the 29th, because we just wanted to get that message to as many of the Elite community as we could reach, to say, kind of be there, because if you take part, you've got a chance of being in something that might be really memorable. I hope it works. So
it'd be a shame for people to miss out on it simply because they were unaware of it.
Exactly.
So,
and I'm still seeing people on Twitter and Reddit going, so what's this? What's happening on the 29th? And you're kind of like, how can you possibly?
Well, the fact they're even asking now, I think, is a good sign, though.
Exactly. So
it shows the message is getting out there.
We are reaching people, and that was really the intention. It wasn't trying to be particularly mysterious and awkward. It was trying to get people's attention to say that something's happening.
Aware of it.
But also the fact that if you leave a slightly enigmatic clue, it people keep coming back to it, and that helps to remind people that something's coming up. So it's it's little things like that. We're not trying to be deliberately mysterious and awkward. It's just we want as many people involved as possible.
Yeah. Well, talking of the event, Zulu Romeo has a question on that, and he asks how much of an impact will the event have on all the people playing the game, from those just starting out to those with billions of credits? And is it an event that could affect the galaxy, basically?
Well, I think it could. It may be that people hear what Salome has to say and go, meh, oh well, fair enough.
Yes.
And they don't react to it. One of the things I've discovered in writing for Elite over the last few years is some things I put and think, wow, this one's really going to get reaction. People have just gone straight past it. And other things where I've gone, oh, there's a little throwaway comment, I think I'll just stick that in because it kind of sounds good. People have gone completely nuts over it, and have trailed off and done stuff as a result. So I really don't know. The potential is certainly there for players to react and do something as a result, but as to whether they will or not remains to be seen. The nice thing about it from my perspective is that I'm putting some content in and people can criticize that one way or the other, quite entitled to do so. But at the end of the day, the choice on how to respond to it will be the players. And is that, we've seen people do all sorts of things as a response to in-game news. We've seen people attack capital ships. We've seen people try and influence the background simulation. We've seen people blockading space stations and UA bombing things. There's lots of stuff you can do, and the more important and big your faction is, the more influence you will have. It may force alliances. It may cause arguments. There's already people who are torn because, of course, Salome was part of the Empire. She's an Imperial, but now the Empire's put a bounty on their head. So if you're a loyal Imperial, who do you follow?
It's true. Yes.
It's the idea behind these things is to try and give either moral or ambiguous political choices for people, which means that if they go down a particular path, then they have to live with the consequences of the actions they take, and they don't know what the outcome of those actions are going to be. That's which is like real life, where you've got a general election coming up, as we've just discovered this week.
Yes.
If I vote Conservative, that's one thing. If I vote Labour, then something else might happen. And if lots of other people do the same as me, we change the course of the future. In the game, it's a similar kind of process. But as to what the outcome is, I wouldn't hesitate to say, the Colonia thing, the outcome of some of the CGs has been a surprise.
Unexpected, yes.
Exactly, and the outcome of this, people may not react to it at all, or people may go, actually, no, we're going to take some action as a result. I don't know. I fondly hope people will do something, but I really don't know what that might be, or whether it will happen at all.
It's going to be great to see, isn't it? You mentioned there about the divide between Salome being an Imperial and the Empire issuing a bounty on their head. I think that kind of connects into another question here, which is from Goose 4291, and he's asking, are all the recent statements referencing Lorraine or Salome coming from Aisling rather than Orisa?
Well, that's a very astute observation, actually, because as people have probably noticed, Orisa has been very quiet over the whole matter, and I think if you understand the position that she's in, and the power that she obviously has as emperor, her silence may indicate things. So you're going to have to keep watching, I think. The
question actually goes on a little bit more. Is there, which you probably can't say any more on, is there a reason that the Bluehead One's dialogue has changed from, well, the tone of her dialogue, has it changed from spoiled Valley Girl to a different style?
Yeah, we've sort of... Aisling's an interesting one, actually, because she was a little bit, too kind of fluffy and non-existent for a long time, and so we've tried to give her a little bit more nous. She's still very driven by appearances, and kind of a an ultra celeb, I suppose you'd sort of characterize her as. But she is, she has an agenda herself, definitely.
Okay. What inspired you to make Reclamation and also do a follow-up?
Well, inspired, I suppose the original Elite game is the ultimate inspiration. The game back in 1984-85 came with a book called The Dark Wheel, which I read as a sort of starry-eyed 14-year-old boy. And I tried very quickly after that to start writing my own science fiction stories. Now, obviously, at the age of 14, they were utterly rubbish. And I've still got one of them. Actually, I found it a few years ago.
Right.
I was digging through, and I've kind of preserved it because it is appalling. I'm not going to ever let anybody read it. But it's kind of nice to have it because it sort of shows the seeds of what would eventually become Elite Reclamation. Inspiration for my Elite books is Elite itself. I was captivated by the game back in 1985 when I got it for my trusty ZX Spectrum. The book that came with it sort of set me on the path of, mysterious, weird and wonderful happenings in the void using the Raxler mystery that was in that original book. And now it's kind of come full circle for me to have the opportunity to do something kind of similar, but in a game which is so much more sophisticated than that early 8-bit version could have ever been. So it's fabulous to be able to see people discovering cool stuff in space that you've kind of had a part in placing there.
Yeah. And there's a similar question there to that then. What inspired the character names and their personalities?
Well, there's a variety here, actually. My favourite story, actually, character-wise, is Luco, or Luciano Prestigio Giovanni, is his full name is. He's actually based kind of a little bit off my uncle, and also after an Italian taxi driver who once drove me to Rome Airport at very, very high speed. Terrified to live and lay that. But he was somebody I remembered very, very vividly as a result. I tried to make the characters quite diverse as well. So, in Reclamation, you had stuck-up imperial snobs, you had kind of low-life types, you had various different people from rich and poor backgrounds. You had kind of religious types and atheistic types and political types, male and female, all sorts of different kind of nationalities and colours and creeds represented in the story, deliberately so, because I kind of see the Elite universe as being very diverse in the future, far more so now probably than we are today. And but all of those nationalistic kind of characteristics, I think, will probably carry forth. I kind of see, expatriate communities holding on to their identities even in space. So I think you'll probably have a kind of Italian zone in certain places, or maybe an Irish pub, throughout, all the different places in Elite Dangerous. Those sorts of things will probably, they'll change obviously over 1,000 years. But I think a lot of that cultural identity stuff will probably still hang
never
around.
Completely go away. Yeah, makes sense.
And so that's how I sort of see a sort of cosmopolitan future. And that's how I've kind of tried to portray it in Elite. I'm not big on using my stories to make kind of socio-political diversity statements. So I won't put in characters just to make a point, if that makes sense. I kind of what I tend to do is I tend to write the stories and then kind of put the the creed and the colours and the descriptions in a bit later, so that I'm not kind of I'm trying to avoid, I suppose, a bit of unconscious bias when I'm writing, to make sure that I concentrate on them being interesting people to start with, and then sort of pencil in their description and their physical attributes a bit later on. Because if you've read my books, you'll notice I don't go into much description. I mean, I think I painted Salome as she's got she's averagely good looking. She has grey eyes and she has dark hair, and I've kind of left the rest of her attributes up to the imagination of the reader. And the same with other people. I will say, the guy is tall, he wears a dark cloak, and he never takes his gloves off. And then again, I leave it to the reader's imagination to kind of fill in the rest of it. And that's worked quite well. It's I think nicer to give the reader the enjoyment of conjuring up images of what these people are like. And some of the descriptions and some of the fan art I've seen have kind of gone like, okay, so that's how you see them, is it? That's not how I saw them, but hey, that's cool, because that's your interpretation of what I wrote, which I think is quite fun.
Yeah, and it's nice. It gives people an attachment to the character, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, that's right. And some of the minor characters I put in, I mean, Luco seems to be a massive favourite, even though he was only really in the last third of Reclamation. Lots of people just like him because clearly he's not quite all he seems. So, but he doesn't allude to what's going on, and he's very jovial. And so you kind of like him, but you kind of think, no, this guy's got a secret that he's not revealing. So do I trust him? But he's still nice. Well, at least he seems to be nice.
Yes.
So, and he's kind of like your friendly uncle, but who's a little bit untrustworthy. It's that sort of relationship that you end up.
Yeah, never quite sure what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. How much info did you get about where the lore is going?
The lore is an interesting one. The how much info do I get? How do I answer that? They basically, I get info when I ask for it. So I don't. There's not like there's a lore digest that comes out every month.
I see. Yeah.
I mean, it would be jolly handy if there was, and very interesting, but I don't think anybody's got time to do that. So basically, when I bump up against a issue in the story and I go, I wonder what the answer to that is, or how's that supposed to work, I'll simply fire off a question to Frontier, usually to Michael Brooks, who'll usually come back within a couple of hours saying it works like this and this happens. Sometimes it'll take a bit longer depending on kind of who he's got to consult. So, Frontier basically are the arbiters of that. But there isn't really a law guide, to be honest, that we're kind of working from directly. It's not kind of written down in some amazingly leather-bound encyclopedia in Frontier's office. More's the pity. So and they've had to revise some of the previous stuff that was kind of thought to be canon in the previous games. I mean, some stuff had already gone by the wayside when we wrote the original books, but more has changed since. And that's really just to up the drama of what's happening now. And what I'm at pains to say, which I think actually is something that somebody at Frontier said to me, but I can't remember who now. Elite Dangerous is inspired by what has gone before, but it's not bound by it. And I think that's the kind of way to look at the previous games at this point. So some of the stuff in those previous games definitely makes an appearance. There's no doubt about it. But not all of it. And at this point in time, unless it's kind of come up on Galnet or it appears in game in a tourist beacon or anything like that, then it arguably isn't canon. So I think that lore will continue to evolve a bit for the next few years as the game continues to establish itself, because for the purposes of content and dramatic storytelling and all that kind of good stuff, some of the stuff from before doesn't really translate so well now, because you're dealing with a very different game. This is an MMO now, and the original games definitely weren't. They were single player campaigns all the way through.
That makes sense. At some point, you can't let yourself tie yourself to the past when it doesn't make sense to do so. No,
you've got to. They've kind of approached it a bit more flexibly than that. But they're certainly not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They're being sensitive to what's gone before, but like I say, not being bound by it. So it's not a religious observant of previous. You can't take one of the previous games and say it happened in the previous game, therefore it definitely happened in Elite Dangerous. That's not a safe thing to be doing.
Yeah, it ties you down a bit too much.
It does, yeah. And I think they wanted, again, we're going back to aliens again here, but Thargoids were certainly mentioned in the previous games. In Elite Dangerous, they seem to be rather a lot more kind of mythological, and maybe it kind of never really happened, or maybe it did, but we're not sure. Now these other aliens have turned up. Are they the Thargoids? Question mark at this point in time. And Thargoids is our name for them. We don't know what they call themselves.
Exactly.
Although there are some clues in T. James' excellent book, Out of the Darkness. So that is an official Elite book, which does give it a bit more background on those Thargoids and the historical encounters with them.
That's really interesting to know.
So there is a bit of genuine lore in T. James' Out of the Darkness book.
Okay. Oberos has asked some questions of you before, and that one of them specifically was concerning fan art, and that you answered it, telling him that you really liked Isonona's videos. He's asking you now, what is there out there that you like now in relation to Elite, created by the fans? Is there anything that you're listening to or watching and that you could recommend?
Well, I suppose I'm probably not allowed to recommend your videos, am I?
No, he specifically says that. He specifically says Obsidian Ant's videos don't count.
I must admit, all joking aside, I found your videos very, very handy to kind of keep up to pace with things. But there are a lot of other creators out there doing some very, very cool stuff. So I mean, I get sent so many links and so many things to click on that if I kept clicking on those and watching YouTube videos, I'd never get
be there forever.
There are lots of very clever people, and I'm delighted that we've now got this much more sophisticated external camera that people will doubtless be producing some amazing, almost
I'm sure we're going to see a lot more
cinematographic kind of quality of stuff before too long. And to be honest, some of the stuff that's been done even with that kind of basic external debug camera has been pretty impressive. But there are some some significant limitations for that. So I like seeing. I mean, I've got on my wall actually behind me somebody who drew me a line art painting, a line art drawing by hand. It's not printed or anything or done with a computer. It's literally done with a pen and pencil. A lovely Imperial Clipper. In front of a ringed gas giant. That was done by Drew Wagar on the forums.
That sounds great.
And she sent that to me just because. So all the way from actual what I would call old-fashioned art, i.e., picking up a pencil and drawing.
Don't hear that very often.
All the way through to YouTube videos and digital graphics, and even some of the funny stuff. I mean, I've really liked the months and months ago when people started doing the Elite Dangerous. Hitler discovers the engineers.
Oh yes,
all those sort of stuff. I mean,
those ones are always good.
Those are brilliant, and I like the funny content as well. So they always give me a good chuckle. So all that stuff is fabulous. I watch a lot of it, I must admit, and it's great. And when people discover something cool and then they make a video out of it, just because I've literally just found this and here it is, guys. Those rough and ready videos that kind of capture the excitement of what the player just saw. Those are great too. They're a good way to keep up with what's going on in the game.
Oh, nice stuff out there. There's one here about Salome having used an escape pod twice previously, once in Reclamation and once at the prison colony. So is there any chance that should she get caught in the 29th of April event, could she make use of an escape pod again?
I mean, I could certainly consider that. The way I've kind of viewed the escape pods in Elite is that in Reclamation, Salome was kind of put in one by somebody else.
Yes.
They also did escape slightly later in the story. Having disabled the ship and then using escape pod to get out of there. So the escape pod mechanism is a lore thing from that perspective. In the case of the how she had got away from being sent to the asylum, that wasn't an escape pod, that particular one. If you read the Galnet article clearly, you'll see that the prisoner convoy was destroyed, and she was presumed dead because there was nothing left, not even the black boxes. So obviously in the book you'll find out how she escaped that, because we now know she's alive.
So just assuming then that was
but that was not an escape pod. No, that was not an escape pod.
That's interesting.
So in the case of obviously when you play the game, if you die or your ship gets blown up, then you sort of magically get teleported back to wherever you last docked, which is obviously a gameplay mechanic. Now, in my head, that's kind of not an escape pod, because it could be, but it isn't necessarily. I would quite like to see a mechanic that you actually had to press a button and you were jettisoned into space in some fashion and then maybe magically teleported back to space. But that's not how the game works at present. The problem with that, of course, is that if you don't press it out in time, then maybe you really are dead.
Yes.
But that would force people to play in an Iron Man mode, which probably wouldn't be very popular. So I understand that that's a bit of a contrivance for the needs of gameplay. Now, if however you follow that logically to what we're attempting to do here, we are playing these characters in Iron Man mode, in a mode where somebody is being attacked, really attempting to kill somebody. And we're not talking about just destroying a ship, we are attempting to kill somebody here. You don't get the bounty unless she's dead. Basically, if you're an attacking vessel and you see somebody escape in an escape pod, your instant reaction, I would have thought, would be to turn your guns on the escape pod.
An escape pod, yes.
So I'm kind of running it that way in my head to say that even if you ejecting from an escape pod in the midst of a battle is probably not a great idea anyway.
It's likely going to get shot anyway, isn't it? Yeah.
Escape pods are kind of for massive ship malfunctions, which you're evacuating because your ship's badly damaged for perhaps other reasons. But an escape pod in battle, to me, doesn't.
Yeah, probably not likely to last very long.
No, it's not a very realistic scenario, is it? Because an escape pod is small, therefore it can't be very well shielded, if at all. Maybe it's not a very easy target to hit, but I think people would give it a pretty good go. And an escape pod being ejected from a ship is a pretty obvious, perhaps a pretty obvious thing. I'm not sure, but I mean, for the sake of the 29th event, ship destruction is death, effectively.
Okay. Assuming she does survive, is there any chance she could ever be reinstated as a senator?
Well, that's an interesting one. She's kind of, I mean, she'd have to find a way to navigate back through the politics that she's kind of abrogated. She gave up the responsibilities of the PRISM system to Ambassador Cuthrick Delaney at the end of the book, and in order to go off and do what she had to do, she lost her title through Fleet Admiral Patrius, should I say, intervening in her trial and making sure that she stood for the crimes of trying to assassinate him. And as a result of that, at the moment, she is titleless and rankless. So I don't think she's effectively even an imperial citizen at this point in time. Now, anything can be undone by people in positions of authority above her. Would they do that? What would be their justification for doing it? At the moment, she's wanted by the Empire, so I think that would be a pretty unlikely outcome at this stage.
Some time back, I can't remember now whether it was 2016 or 2015, there was a number of Galnet articles about the Cerberus virus. The question here wants to know if that's connected in any way to the storyline, or if you think it might make a reappearance at some point down the line.
That's an interesting one. It's not something I've been directly involved in. One of the things that's important to realise, I mean, I'm not the only writer writing Galnet articles by a long shot. So there are plenty of other stories being weaved, and events that are transpiring in there, and CGs and stuff that are going on. It's not all my doing, not by a long shot. So that particular one isn't anything that I've had to do with. So, but most of the stories, in fact, I'm pretty sure all of the stories that are being kind of played out on Galnet are all interlaced in some way. So I wouldn't rule it out of the possibilities. No.
Does Cuthrick Delaney have control over the Imperial Navy forces in PRISM?
He's in a position of responsibility for the Keone Moon. He actually kind of delegates the responsibility for the command forces to an in-game faction that's actually player-driven called Lorenz Legion, and the commander of Lorenz Legion is also a player who arguably has the jurisdiction of those forces. So PRISM, if you like, is defended by Lorenz Legion, who is a player faction. Then. And they basically they've done rather well for themselves. Actually, they are now influential in 15 systems, I think it is, around the PRISM system. Yeah. And they're basically
big numbers.
Yeah, that's right. And their strategy has been to basically try and prevent any incursions by the Federation by taking over and controlling the systems around them. So they are arguably still under Fleet Admiral Patrius's influence in power play, which of course is an interesting situation for them to be in.
Yes.
But they have autonomy in defending PRISM against anything else that comes along. So they were instrumental in the recent CG when the Tantalum was being delivered, because they were effectively working alongside the system authorities there to safeguard incoming traffic.
Do you think there'll ever be another Elite novel after Premonition? Yeah. Right in the middle of the one now. Steve.
Yeah, I know. Well, I suppose that's a two-part question. I mean, I suppose if I was to ask that of myself, I'd always be up for writing more Elite stories, but I know how much work it is involved, and there are some of my own projects I'd like to get on with and deal with too. So there is a time and an effort consideration there. Ultimately, at the end of the day, any new books are the gift of Frontier, not me.
Sure.
So if they offer that opportunity, then so be it. I'm also conscious that there are certainly all the other Kickstarter authors that wrote books at the same time as me. You've got some hugely talented people there. You've got Kate Russell and T. James and Alan Stroud and all the other people who are involved there with John Harper and those books that came out. So people like that, you might say maybe one of them deserves a shot next time round rather than me. And I'd be quite happy with that because I think that's only fair. There are also people who've kind of watched these official novels and gone, well, I wouldn't mind having a try at that myself. Just because you were a Kickstarter author really just meant you were in the right place at the right time back in 2012. There's certainly that doesn't mean that those are the only people who can ever write an official Elite story. So quite what the future holds, I wouldn't like to say. I would certainly be up for more books given time. I might need a bit of a rest between them.
That one.
But if Frontier wants to give other people shots at doing that sort of stuff, then I think that's good because variety is the spice of these things. The sort of stuff you're going to get with me, and maybe people would like a change from that after a certain length of time, and I think that's only healthy.
Sure.
So that's really one for Frontier more than me. I don't really know what their plans are. I know they're quite interested in expanding the franchise of Elite Dangerous, and there are other franchises like Planet Coaster as well, and they've got other stuff in the works as their annual reports sort of kind of allude to. Quite what their ambitions in the different forms of media that you can push out are, I wouldn't like to say, but I don't think it's. I think it's unlikely, and I don't think we'd see it anytime soon. But who knows? Maybe there would be a film or a TV show, or who knows what might else come up. We've seen them now start to bring voice acting into the game. What does that mean for the future? It means they're looking at changing and expanding what Elite Dangerous itself is and is capable of. And I think we're almost in a situation with technology and the way things work nowadays that the lines between book and game and film and TV and acting and all those sort of things get a bit blurred. Yes. And I think they're looking at what does that mean? What does Frontier want to do with that? Because the Elite Dangerous franchise is now it's a brand in itself. It's very well recognized. It commands attention, and ultimately, at the end of the day, they are a business. They would be mad not to make the most out of that as they possibly can. So I think the future of stuff, if you like, is very, very bright. But precisely what it will be, will there be more books? I suspect there probably will be. Will I be writing them? Well, maybe I'll be involved. But I'd like to see some of the other authors get their chance as well.
So one other question here, I think I can possibly answer this one myself, actually, is have you created a Hollow Me character for Salome? If so, can it be a screenshot? Now, I think I saw something like that on the forum thread. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's been set up for me. I kind of gave some guidelines, and I must admit, my Hollow Me creations are pretty ghastly.
I'm sure not as bad as some of them out there. I've seen some terrible ones.
Yeah, some of them are quite scary, aren't they? So somebody has basically tried to get the in-game Salome as close to some of the fan art stuff and some of the original photography that I used for the books as possible. Now there are some limitations on that because obviously in most of the representations of Salome she's got long hair, which is not possible with the Hollow Me, so we've had to kind of go for a slightly contrived bob for Salome, which is close enough, but it's not quite right. But and also we noticed that grey eyes are not possible. There aren't any grey eyes in the options dialogue, so we sort of had to choose a pale blue and then alter the contrast slightly when we mucked about with the imagery. So it's not quite a perfect representation, but we were trying to get a slightly haunted kind of face that somebody who is quite young but has gone through a lot of stuff. And I think what we came up with was quite close. I mean, I look at her and I think, yes, that reminds me of the character in my book. So I'm pretty happy with it. So if people haven't seen that, it was tweeted a little while back. I'll see if I can retweet it again at some point.
Well, if I can find it, I'll put it on the video here so we can see it right now.
I think there's a link somewhere in the questions thread, if I recall. So
Okay.
it should be there.
I'll go and look for it. Okay, Mel Brennan wants to know what your thoughts are on the ethics of writing about historical figures in a fictional universe.
The ethics of writing about historical figures. I'm wondering who he's referring to there.
I was wondering that, whether you've written about any personally, or whether they're actually written in some Galnet articles by either you or other people.
Yeah, I'm not. I suppose in terms of historic, I wonder if he means historic in terms of the 21st century being referenced in the future.
Yeah, from our times, I'd assume.
Yeah, so I'm not aware that I've done that. So, but in terms of referencing historical stuff, you do have to be a bit careful, because, of course, what is historical and significant to us here in the 21st century, 1,000 years from now, probably won't be nearly as significant as we think it is. So, for example, we would still today, if I reference Hitler, for example, people alive in the 21st century would probably still go, oh yeah, Hitler. Whereas if you said Hitler in 3300, I wouldn't expect the vast majority of people to have even heard of him, because can you name a vicious dictator from 8050 AD, for example?
Yes. Especially when you consider how many trillions of people there might be at that particular time.
The population of Earth today is several billions, isn't it? That's just one planet now. In 3300, in Elite Dangerous, the number of notable people that there will have been historically by that point will be enormous. And as far as the Empire, let's say, is concerned, then the history of Earth might have even been erased from the history books as irrelevant, because the Empire started in 20 whenever it was, and that's the only history that people have ever read.
Yes.
So I don't think I would personally want to quote historical figures from the perspective of the 21st century in a piece of science fiction set in the 34th century, because I don't think it's all that realistic to have done so. Because I don't think characters, people, historical figures who are significant now would still have significance 1,000 years from now. I don't think, in 1,000 years we could have had a much, much nastier piece of work than Hitler ever was in, say, 2800, that everyone would think would be much, much more significant in 3300 than Hitler was in 30, from their perspective. So I think, from a science fiction perspective, I would avoid significant historical figures. It's the same way that you avoid, I think you should, it's my opinion, you should avoid kind of pop references in science fiction if you're writing a serious piece of science fiction. So, I wouldn't refer to, do you remember that band in the 1980s?
Yeah, from 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, the chances of somebody 1,000 years
ago
ago
around for 5 minutes
remembering Spandau Ballet are fairly unlikely.
Yeah.
So it's that sort of thing. So I wouldn't quote historical figures from our history into a science fiction novel set that far in the future, because I think there would have been too much more history by that point to have made it realistic. I'm actually in an aside, there's an interesting piece in Premonition coming up, which you'll read when you get there, is some of our characters do actually get to visit the Earth, and I've had an opportunity to kind of explore what is the Earth like in 3303, and kind of just reflect on what happened to the Earth as a result of those last 1,000 years. It's only a relatively small piece, but it gives you a flavour of my kind of take on that sort of stuff. Yeah.
How sincere is Salome in her anti-slavery stance, considering she put down that slave rebellion?
Oh, well, that's a slight conflict of characters. I think Salome isn't anti-slavery. Actually, Salome is pro-slavery. I think whoever's asking the question is getting confused with Aisling, who is anti-slavery.
No, quite possibly then.
So no, Salome is very much quoted as being in favour of slavery, because she believes that in the Empire, slavery done properly, should I say, where slaves are well treated and effectively are given a job for life or until they pay off whatever they've been set up to do, debt or a certain level of income, is a better way of looking after people than giving them handouts, which is effectively what happens in the Federation. So
Yes.
Salome is very much pro-slavery in the true imperial sense. She was the daughter of the senator who put down the slave rebellion in the book, so she wasn't directly responsible for it. It was her father who did that. So she hasn't caused a mass genocide, but on the flip side, she did, through her actions in Reclamation, start a war. Well, almost start a war with the Federation. Certainly started a major conflict over the Prism Moon. So she's certainly not blameless, or she's certainly not.
Don't shy away from causing a bit of trouble.
No, she certainly causes trouble and controversy, but she's
Yes.
not a genocidal maniac, I wouldn't say.
Okay. What is it like? Do there be any more of highly visible lesbian, gay or bi relationships in Elite? And I know early on you sort of touched on not really writing on creed or colour until kind of afterwards, but
Yeah,
is that something you're likely to see at any point?
there is in Premonition there are some characters if you read it in that light, you may think you may want to read your own views of that. I've tried to kind of not make any of that sort of stuff over. I've never mentioned the relationships that characters kind of have with each other overtly in my books. It's not something that I really feel all that comfortable doing, because it feels a bit contrived, and B, I'm not. I don't really count myself as qualified to write about it.
Yeah.
So because I like to write sort of stuff I know, and that for me would be quite a traditional sort of heterosexual kind of outcome. I've got a lot of friends who are of different sexual inclinations and all that sort of stuff, and I know a lot about that, but it's not something I think I'm all that qualified to write about. So I've definitely left the relationship side of stuff out of these books, actually. So a lot of people were quite surprised with Reclamation when Salome didn't end up falling in love with anybody.
Yes.
Partly I wanted her to kind of be her own agent and have agency in the story on her own, not need anybody else to define who she was. Everybody else actually goes, ooh, well, stay out of her way because she's doing stuff. And she doesn't need anybody else, male or female, or any other gender, to be honest, to define what she does.
It also depends, I guess, on how much anything like that actually adds to the story you're writing at the time.
Yeah, and I think
it's inserting something just for the sake of inserting it.
Yeah, just because that's
But whether it's heterosexual or whatever,
So I've never found it necessary to use that to further a story. Some people in some of my other books do have relationships, but I suppose I haven't really given it a huge amount of consideration because it's not the sort of storytelling I do. That said, I do try to make my characters as diverse as possible. And there are some situations in Premonition where you might think, that character is that way inclined, but it won't be an overt thing. If some people may see it one way, some people may see it a different way. So I think you can read your own, preferences into those things. I try not to make the characters too descriptive, and I think we talked about that a little bit earlier on, didn't we? I give them a vague. Sure. This is roughly what they look like in quite broad brushstrokes, and then if you want to fill in gaps that suit your understanding and your preferences, then I think that's cool. Invent those characters.
Seems to work well, doesn't it? I like that approach.
Invent those characters the way you want them to be, and then see if their motivations line up with the way they behave. Yeah.
Do you see
Good question.
Do you see the Elite Galaxy as utopian or dystopian?
I think it's largely dystopian with small pockets of utopia. I don't think you would describe the whole thing as one, but the general feeling I get from Elite is that actually humanity isn't quite as good as it is now.
Seems to have regressed in some ways.
It seems to regress. It seems to be a lot more kind of aggressive and frontiery with the lowercase f.
Yes.
It's kind of a little bit more Wild West than today. We live in a world today where everything has been explored, where, obviously there's areas that are less well known on the Earth than others, but you can't really go, right, I'm going to sail across the ocean and find another continent. You can't do that anymore. If you fly across the continent now, you'll just find somebody else with a picket fence kind of looking back at you.
Yes.
Whereas in Elite, where, yes, there's the bubble and the core worlds, which are well known, but you don't have to travel too long and too far to go somewhere where nobody's ever been before, which means that, law and justice and thing becomes a very fluid thing once you're out beyond certain jurisdiction, and then mankind's or humankind's sort of base instincts start to take over. This is my moon, I discovered it, therefore I'm going to kill you if you try and take it from me, kind of stuff. I think that's exactly how humanity will behave out there. Whoever's got the biggest guns gets to set the law.
Yeah.
And if you go back into history, in the UK we still have a perhaps less spoken about but still quite obvious class system, and the people who are the power brokers in our society today are only the power brokers because their ancestors ultimately, somewhere along the line, probably had the biggest guns.
Yes. It's just the same for many cultures, I think, isn't it, in societies?
Right. Exactly. So whoever's ends up with the biggest guns,
to the future.
Exactly. Yeah. Whoever's got the biggest guns gets the most territory, therefore gets the most therefore gets the most money when the economy catches up, and and there we go again, just bigger. So I think the universe is quite dystopian. I think there are some places that are trying to be different. Colonia is rather interesting in that regard. It'd be interesting to see how long that lasts before it factionalizes. They're trying to be quite utopian right now, but if human history is anything to go by, I suspect that won't last too long, unfortunately.
Guess it depends how long they can keep the guns out.
Exactly, and I think people may go, well, there's something that I could exploit, and they may work with some disaffected members out there, and then maybe we'll have a civil war, and who knows what will happen. So, but that's story unfolding again, isn't it?
Of course, and that reflects how Frontier quite are willing to change things sometimes. I remember back when, not too long after Colonia started, there was talk of Frontier introducing other factions out there for the purpose of conflict. But a lot of people out there in Colonia at the time was hoping for things to go a slightly different way, more utopian, as you were suggesting there. And I think Frontier ultimately accommodated that.
Yes, people didn't want another bubble, did they? They wanted an alternative way of doing stuff. So, and good luck to them. I think I think the Colonia thing is fascinating. I deliberately went out there last summer to go and take a look around and kind of experience it for myself, and it was an interesting experience. Having travelled out there, takes a fair old time to do it, and I enjoyed that trip. It was interesting, and it felt good to arrive at a kind of little outpost in the middle of nowhere and find that there was humanity out there.
Yeah.
That was really good.
It's nice to see it all expanding out. What sort of additional cosmetics would you like to see for our commanders, whether they're free or on the store or otherwise?
I'd definitely like to see the longer hair. I know that's a technical challenge for all sorts of reasons, and there's also the practical challenge of what is long hair actually practical in a spaceship when you've got to wear a mask on occasion. That's a perfectly reasonable thing, but I can't see Princess Aisling, for example, trimming her hair every time she had to travel on the spaceship. So there must be ways around that problem. That I would like to see, because I think that would give people more flexibility to express themselves. I'd quite like to see the thing I noticed that was surprisingly missing, which I thought was quite odd not to be there. I mean, they've got tattoos and things, but they didn't have any jewellery.
No, I was just about to mention that as well.
And obviously dangly earrings and things like that would be potentially liable. But stud type piercings and things like that, I would have thought would have been relatively easy to do. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a developer, but that sort of stuff.
Maybe it's something that'll come later.
Maybe it'll be cosmetic add-ons and things like that, you say. But that's the sort of stuff I thought they might do, because earrings are pretty ubiquitous things, and if people want to put piercings in their nose and stuff like that, then an awful lot of people I think would probably want to do that.
Yeah, nice option to have.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I kind of touched on the next question earlier. It's in regards to an Elite novel, and potentially getting into a TV series, either through Sci-Fi Channel or Netflix or whatever. And I think really that's a frontier question. But the second part to the question was, if that wasn't to be done with Reclamation, have you ever had any thoughts about doing that with the Shadewood saga?
I haven't had. Well, I mean, the idea of turning Shadewood into a TV series or a movie would be fabulous. I'd very much love to do that. I haven't had any serious thoughts about making a proposition on that at this point, partly because I haven't got the time, and partly I'd have to do quite a lot of research to find out what was actually involved in even approaching that to a company. But it's a great idea. I think actually the Shadewood stuff would actually work quite well as an episodic TV series or even a film, and certainly Elite would. In fact, I remember when I went to see Star Wars. I can't remember which one it was now. Not the Rogue One, but the one before that. Force Awakens, and Frontier had bought a lot of advertising space for the Elite game, and I was sitting in the cinema watching the Elite advert, and a lot of people were kind of watching, going, "Oh, that's cool. What's that?" And it kind of. Sadly looking a little bit disappointed at the end when they discovered it was a computer game, because I think they thought another type of film was coming up.
Half looked good on the big screen though, didn't it?
It looked fabulous, and oddly enough, my wife turned to me at the end of it and says, "You should write a book about that."
Well,
it looked great on the big screen, and my type of story writing, I do try to. I'm a very visual writer, to be honest. I try and visualize in my head what's happening, and hopefully that comes out in the way that my stories kind of relate to and read. Is I try and write them as if a film reel is playing in my head. So they would probably be pretty easy to adapt to TV and film, I would have thought. But it's not my area of expertise whatsoever. I don't really know what's involved in it. So at this stage, if somebody rings me up tomorrow and says, "Just seen your Shadewood book, love it, want to turn it into a film, what do we do?" then fantastic. But I haven't got any particular plans to do that at the moment. I've got my hands full. I mean, my other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to audio book the Shadewood series, but even that is a big undertaking. And that's a question for Frontier as well on Premonition, because there's a mad demand for audiobooks. It's one of the top questions I get asked at the moment: is there an audiobook version coming? To which the answer at the moment is I don't know.
Okay. Will people be able to talk to Salome during or before or even immediately after the event on the 29th? So will we be able to interact with her? Aside from shooting at her?
Yeah, there will definitely be a way to interact with her. And one of the reasons we went with this sort of advanced NPC concept is that it's impossible to program and construct an NPC that can do anything meaningful in terms of dialogue. It's just not possible today to have it kind of coherent. So having a human being at the end of the keyboard who can react and do stuff is quite important to kind of give that a kind of human feel. Now, because I don't know how the event is actually going to run, I mean, I know what we're attempting to do, and I know what our objective is, but how it's going to end and how it's going to traverse, we really don't know. There certainly will be the possibility for players to interact with Salome, but the problem is if there's hundreds and hundreds of players trying to do that, it's going to be very difficult to answer that in any meaningful, certainly in any detailed way, because the Salome character will just be presented with a barrage of white noise by that process.
Yes.
So she and if she's running for her life, answering text messages is probably not going to be the highest thing on her priority list. So from a realistic perspective, that individual one-on-one conversations are probably not likely during the event, because she'll be busy hopefully trying to avoid being killed.
Yes.
But that's not to say that there won't be opportunities for interaction, because there'll have to be places where pauses happen, and if she does get to do what she wants to do and rendezvous with other characters and stuff, then we do have the ability to have that interaction in game. So she's certainly a person you can interact with, but she will be pretty busy at that point in time.
Trying to keep herself alive.
So you're not going to, if somebody asks her, how do you like your steak, for example, she's probably not going to be all that receptive to that question at that point in time.
Indeed. Okay, well, the next question is alien-related one again, a Thargoid-related one. So probably can't answer it directly, but the gist of it is, have you ever given it much thought that the Galnet logo looks suspiciously like a Thargoid ship?
That was interesting, wasn't it? I mean, like you say, it could just be a coincidence.
Yes.
But it's surprisingly like a 8-sided alien ship, isn't it? I don't know.
Indeed.
I mean, I looked at that, and
could just be coincidence. But...
yeah, it's one of those things that if it had turned out to have any meaning, we could all go, oh yeah, well, we all said so, and of course it might just be a coincidence, in which case it just is. I don't know what to make of that.
Yes, it's a typical type design, isn't it? If you want something representing a galaxy, then it's
it's a sort of
typical type of logo. But
yeah, that's right.
Coincidentally, it's
8-sided. Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't know about that one. Maybe that was a little in-joke by the devs, possibly.
It may have been. The question kind of related to that is, do you think Galnet is always trustworthy, or does it sometimes spread lies?
Oh, absolutely not trustworthy. Yeah, no. You've got to sift Galnet for the truth. There's a lot of people and a lot of organisations that contribute to Galnet, and sometimes that's being spokespersons for particular individuals or groups or factions or superpowers, and they've all got their agenda. And
not too unlike our own news network Centre today.
That's right. I mean, you've kind of got to. The best way of looking at Galnet, I think, is almost like a repository of several different newspapers. So if you imagine the Daily Mail and the Guardian and the Telegraph and the Express all pumping out articles, Galnet would just be a kind of aggregator for those articles. Galnet itself wouldn't. It almost is just a mechanism to distribute, I think, the news rather than it is a news outlet itself. I've had 2 imperial newspapers, for example, in my stories. One's called the Imperial Herald and one's called the Imperial Citizen, and they both put completely different spins on the same events.
Yes.
So what you see in Galnet, depending on who wrote it, may be the truth or may not be. And it will certainly be self-serving from whoever wrote it, I'm sure.
I don't quite know the reference of this entirely, but apparently there was a part of the Formidine Rift puzzle at some point in the past where different parts of the story different parts of the puzzle were spread across different stations. Is that right?
I'm just trying to think back now. Well, you certainly had the outposts where different stuff was found there. There were certainly some related articles at different systems, local news and systems, rather than kind of the global Galnet as well, which you may have missed if you weren't in that system at the time. So I don't know if that's what they were referring to.
No, the question was basically aimed at the difficulty of players assembling the various puzzle pieces due to the fact that each puzzle part was at various different stations. But I'm not sure if that was part of the Formidine puzzle or whatever it was. I don't quite remember that.
Doesn't sound like the Formidine Rift to me. That sounds like maybe that was something else. Certainly most of the Formidine Rift puzzles have been duplicated or triplicated to kind of make sure that people got them.
Okay. Right.
With a few kind of nudges in the right direction every so often.
Sure. Twisted Helix wants to know if you're going to be going back to the Shadewood saga after Premonitions.
Not immediately, no. I've got one other project that I need to sort out, which is the Lords of Midnight novel. For those of you who came like me from the ZX Spectrum will recognise the name Lords of Midnight. It's another 8-bit computer game from the 1980s, and I'm working on the official novel for that one. So that will be the next book that comes out after Premonition. And then after that, the plan currently is to go back and write Shadewood 3, the name of which I must have it's been so long since I've been working on that, I can't actually remember the name of it, but it will be Shadewood 3. It'll be something that starts in E and ends in Shun, like all the other Shadewood books. So yeah, Shadewood 3 is slated for release some point in 2018.
Okay. And is that Lords of Midnight book related to a new upcoming game at all?
Well, Lords of Midnight was a game in '85, and it has recently been kind of remade in a sort of retro modern fashion for Android and iOS. So it's available now, but it's not a like a fantastic huge budget remake of the original. It's more a kind of loving retro makeover for iPads and Android phones and that sort of stuff. So if you do a search for Lords of Midnight for iOS or on Android, you'll find it there. It already exists. I loved the game back in the 80s and had the opportunity to write an official novel for that one as well. So I'm doing the novelization of that game as well.
Great.
And there was a sequel to that as well called Doomdark's Revenge, which hopefully we'll get to at some point in the future too. So my list of books that I've got to write.
Yeah, you've got enough to keep you going for a few years by the sound of it.
Will keep me going well past 2020 at the rate I'm going.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I've got plenty to be getting on with.
Okay. Assuming you had unlimited resources and a bit more direct control over elite development, what sort of storytelling tools would you like to see within the game?
Oh, that's a good question. I would like to see, what would be very handy for me would be a way to easily inject bits of lore and bits of dialogue and ship assets and rec sites and stuff like that in numerous places, and that would allow you to link up a far more sophisticated set of clues in the game very, very quickly. Right now, the installation of assets into the game is something that only the devs can do, and that's they've got their own tools for doing it, but it's still a relatively laborious task to undertake. If that could be, if I had a log on to Elite Dangerous with a point and click interface that I could go, right, I want to stick an XYZ in the so and so star system, and it's triggered using these handles, and you can only see it if you honk your Discovery scanner within 20,000. If I had lots of sliders for those sorts of things, that would be awesome. But such a thing doesn't exist as far as I'm aware. So that would go a long way. And if I could cut and paste from a Word document directly into the dialogue system of the game, all that sort of stuff, that would be awesome. But I suspect that's something that's a long way off.
Quite possibly,
but something like that would be awesome. It would be very, very good. Yeah.
Saying that, I think with the update of 2.3, Frontier have got the ability to basically directly inject ships and stations into areas now without a big patch update.
Yeah, I mean that was a massive limitation before. That you had to. I think. They'd certainly broken it into client-side and server-side updates. Now, server-side updates were, I think, the easy one because they could adjust the server themselves. If whatever it is you needed to do required a client update, that was a big deal because you had to force everybody to update their client. And they didn't really want to do that too often because it's quite irritating to come in and try and start the game and then find you've got to download 6 gigabytes of change game.
It gets expensive as well on consoles, I'd imagine.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's an awful lot of pragmatic limitations as to when they drop content because of things like that. But I'm sure they'll, if they've got plans for certain type of content and they want to be able to update it quickly, they'll have to they obviously have taken a long hard look at that infrastructure and gone, well, we need to optimize that so we can move things quicker. How do we do that? And that may be move. I don't know about how the architecture of the game actually is, but if you can move things from client to server and server to client to optimize that process, then obviously I think they've spent some time doing things like that to make that creation process easier.
Yeah, it could be quite promising. What's your favourite ship to fly?
Favorite ship to fly? I must admit, I've got a big soft spot for the Imperial Clipper now. I didn't like it at first, for all sorts of reasons. But I must admit, it's grown on me a lot over the time, and it tends to be my kind of go-to ship for just tooling around in the Elite universe because it's quite quick. It's reasonably sized. It can hold its own in combat, and it's quite a good multi-purpose ship. And it kind of looks cool because of the whole Imperial kind of swishy stuff that's going on. So I do like that. I'm a massive fan of the Cobra just because it's the Cobra.
Yeah.
That's a good. But I must admit, when I want to go in for a bit of kind of sort of pew pew, then I tend to gravitate to the little Imperial Courier.
Yes, nice ship, isn't it?
It's a nice little ship. It's got nice big fat shields, and I stick a couple of beam lasers on it, and I'm Luke Skywalker. So
perfect.
I enjoy that little ship as well. So yeah, and there's a nice variety of ships, but I think those are probably my three kind of favourite ones. Although I've got a big soft spot for the Asp Explorer as well when I'm off exploring. That is the fact that you can look down from the cockpit as you're landing. Makes it feel a bit like you're flying a helicopter, which I like on that kind of planetary approach bit. So that ship's good. Although it's the
canopy in that ship that's only stopped me from going on to an Anaconda.
Yes,
I think the view's a bit blocked off in that. I prefer the wide open view of the Asp.
I really like the Asp for going off trekking in space.
Yeah, like you also like the Cobra as well.
Although I must admit, with the multi-crew, I bought my first Anaconda not that long ago and set it up with turrets and ship launch fighters so my kids could join me on it, and we had an absolute blast in a conflict zone flying this Anaconda with turreted beam weapons around. So that has been great fun as well.
It sounds like something I should try.
It's I must admit, I was quite skeptical of multi-crew kind of in general in some ways, but having had my kids in the same room, and I'm flying the ship and they're shooting the guns and flying the fighters, and we had an absolute blast. It was brilliant. I was sort of shouting, "Take on the target over there!" And it's as close as you can get to being Captain Janeway, So
brilliant. Yeah,
it was fabulous.
That's something I'm going to have to try out now.
It's really good. It was really good. If you've got some friends with you, or family who are into playing the games, and my kids love it. It really was huge fun. It really was.
Yeah, I've tried it plenty online, but it'd be interesting to try it with the kids. Let's give it a go.
Yes, it's definitely good.
Yeah. How much of the lore writing are you involved with in Elite Dangerous? Is it mainly just the Formidine Rift and Salome, or are you involved in some of the creation of the other lore?
I've done various other bits and pieces. I'm doing less of it at the moment because I'm busy with trying to get this book done. That doesn't really allow time to do much else, but I've certainly been involved in other bits and pieces. So certainly some of the lore beacons that have turned up, some of the mission text and various other bits and pieces, and some of the background that goes behind that. I've definitely been involved in it. That's all good fun. It's not really my preferred contribution, to be honest. Although I like the whole lore piece, I'm very much a sort of drama type person in terms of wanting to, the sort of things I like writing. So I'm actually probably not the best choice, someone to compile a massive tome of Elite lore. I kind of do to a certain extent, because I've got some lore pages on my website, but they're very, very high level, and I don't really have the appetite to go into that much more detail. There are people better qualified than me to do that. Hopefully at some point we will get that kind of Encyclopedia Galactica put together by somebody. I'd love to see that, but it's not something I would relish doing myself.
Yeah, I can understand. It'd be great to see in the game, though.
It would, yes, that would be fabulous. But I'd also like a coffee table version of it as well, that I could just kind of sit in my conservatory and read on a nice kind of warm afternoon, Sunday afternoon when I haven't got anything else to do, and just sort of browse through. I think that'd be a brilliant book to just enjoy.
Right, I've got a question here from Cosmos, and it's to do with the discovery of the megaship yesterday. Basically, to summarise his question, what do you think happened yesterday with the discovery of the megaship that led so many people to think that the megaship was the final part, or the final solution to the Formidine Rift mystery? And I must admit, I made the same mistake to that myself after reading various comments on the forum.
Yeah, I must admit, I probably... I was delighted that people had found it, because I knew how much effort had gone into it, and Frontier had put lots of new stuff in. Obviously, it was a new megaship. It was the first time we had voice actors coming in. The voice actors were really keen to see their stuff being shown of him. So we probably all got a little bit carried away with it. Isn't it cool? Yeah. And I think I probably made some slightly poor choice of words in the way I tweeted it, and maybe some of the things I said on Reddit as well, just saying, look, hey, isn't it cool that we found it? Congratulations, everyone. The Rift is giving up its secrets, kind of stuff. And I think some people took that as, oh, that's it. We've discovered it. But I thought you said it wasn't going to be a POI. You told us it wasn't going to be a POI. Yes. And it kind of sort of went on from there.
Snowballed.
Which I get. So it was probably a little bit my fault, to be honest. It wasn't, it's not the end of that thing. It's a big part of it, because it's the thing that we had placed at the end of the We'd Quack line, which we'd kind of started out all those years ago. So that's an important thing. And obviously it physically was in the Formidine Rift, which is now where the mapping project has placed the Formidine Rift. So in that sense, it is a thing that we were looking for, but it's not the mystery. The mystery certainly isn't solved. And then, as people have listened to those logs, we know that this is a piece of that puzzle. It's a piece of evidence. It's not the answer.
Yeah, as we said earlier, it goes on to basically another chapter in a way.
Yeah, it's I suppose it would be a cliffhanger, wouldn't it? If it's a big thing that they discovered right at the end, and now what happens in the next chapter? What happens in the next chapter? The players will get to write that next chapter, which is the cool bit.
Okay. Bobby Dillon wants to know how you go about instilling tension in a sci-fi universe where it makes more sense to control ships remotely than it does to manually pilot them.
Ah, yes, the telepresence question.
Yeah.
I do.
The ever-present question.
I don't have a rationalization for that one, to be honest. All of that stuff about Elite doesn't make sense, because it falls down very, very quickly when you try and rationalize it at all. I mean, right from day one, we've had ships that have a finite top speed in space. That's impossible. Right from day one, we've had ships with visible laser beams. That's impossible. Hyperspace is impossible. Frame shift drive is impossible.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we
at some point, it's got to accept some points for being there for gameplay purposes, I guess.
I get the telepresence question, because the obvious question, well, hang on, if you can telepresence across the galaxy, why the hell would you bother piloting a ship out there in the first place? I think that's not a bad question. I don't like the pat answer. It's a game, get over it. I think that's a bit of a cop out myself. But right this minute, I don't have a good explanation of why you would have telepresence, not just have a remotely controlled spaceship.
Pilots as well, yes.
So, or maybe, the only one I can come up with on the spur of the moment, which probably isn't very good, because spur of the moment stuff quite often isn't. But it's just, it's kind of, there's two analogies that spring to mind. One of which is the old classic car thing. Is that, yes, it's fascinating to watch somebody driving a classic car around a racetrack, but wouldn't you rather have a go yourself? And the other one is the kind of, it's great to get a postcard back from Disneyland, but it's a lot more fun to go there yourself.
Yeah, you could go to Disneyland in VR. It wouldn't be the same as going there, would it? And
that's kind of the only thing I can kind of offer, that maybe telepresence is something that people have gone, but it's not the same as being there, is it? Question. And how does telepresence work FTL across the galaxy? I mean, my son's telepresence to my Cobra, which is 40,000 light years away, and it all operates in real time. Well, that's impossible as well. Unless we've got some kind of amazing, we've clearly got some kind of faster than light transmission technology. Because we've seen the text work, but how does that work? The law is quiet and vague on that topic, and I think probably wisely so, because any explanation would be ripped to shreds.
Sometimes it's best to deliberately keep it quiet.
It's a bit like the question that one of the Star Trek technical writers was asked, how do those inertial dampeners work that stop people being splattered across the back of the ship when the ship goes to warp drive? And the answer, I thought, was very, very wise at the time. They work very well.
Brilliant, yeah.
So that's probably
best answer, I think.
I think that's probably the best we can get at this point.
You touched on the question of an audiobook for Premonition earlier, and obviously it's something you don't know the answer to yet. But do you know whether or not, if ever it did happen, you would like to keep the same voice actor from the previous book?
Well, Toby Longworth did a great job And creating audiobooks is a very tricky and expensive business, because actors cost money, clearly, and you've got to put them in a recording studio, and you've got all the complexities of adapting the script so it works as somebody reading it out. We went for mostly an unabridged version, but even that presented challenges. If you want to dramatize it in any kind of way and turn it into multiple characters, you've got a completely different task on your hands as well. And that's before you get to the sound effects and the editing and the post-production and all that stuff, which you probably know an awful lot more about than I do. Toby Longworth is a very, very well-known audiobook narrator. He's done lots of audiobooks. He's done a lot of Arthur C. Clarke level and Star Wars level stuff. So having him to read my audiobook was great, because I benefit from that on Audible, for example, because when you click on Elite Reclamation, it says read by Toby Longworth. But if you happen to go into Audible and go and read a Star Wars book, and it happens to be read by Toby Longworth, if you click on Toby Longworth, it gives you all the books that he's narrated. And of course, therefore,
that's really nice.
Elite Reclamation pops up alongside Star Wars and Arthur C. Clarke. So that's pretty handy.
Yeah, no doubt. That's good. Yeah.
But and he's good at what he does. Now, there are disadvantages of having a single person, because clearly a man is not able to do a woman's voice all that convincingly, although I thought he did a pretty good job, considering he is a bloke. But when you've got a book that's quite strongly polarized with female and male lead characters, that is a compromise, and there's nothing you can do about that. Now, what I'd love to see is Premonition done as an audiobook with a full cast, if you like, of characters, to kind of bring it a bit more to life and put some things behind that. Now, that is certainly possible, but you're talking about something that's pretty darned expensive to do.
Yeah.
Because you've then got multiple characters, and you've got the complexities of organising them, and you've got to turn that script into a dramatisation, not just a plain read-through. Which changes things, because where in a book I can say the Cobra was badly damaged and smoke drifted across the cockpit, that kind of stuff. If you're dramatizing it and two characters are interacting in a smoke-filled Cobra cockpit, you've got to change that description completely and probably cut it out in favor of some special effects or some other ambience that gives you the same impression as the book has done.
Yes.
And that is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, effectively you've got to rewrite the whole book.
You do. You're talking about a complete re-scripting of the book, which doesn't change the story, but certainly changes the way it's delivered. And that's, that is, again, something I would be up for, but as to whether that's within, Frontier's ideas, at this stage I have no idea. Although I'm encouraged to see that they're bringing voice actors into the game, because that certainly shows a willingness to enhance content in that sort of direction. So that's by no means a guarantee that an audiobook of Elite Premonition will ever appear, but certainly the art of the possible has been demonstrated, and I think the players' reactions to the audio logs on that megaship, the Zarura, were really, really positive. They were fabulous.
Yeah, it was great to see all that. Great voice acting there, and great to see the reaction to it, like you say. I don't think anyone actually said anything bad to say about that. Not one word.
No, I think it was quite enticing to see that for the first time. And we know from the actors, they've let slip little spoilers that those aren't the only ones.
Yes.
So we'll probably
something
find some
else
other,
out there.
There's other stuff out there that we may come across, which is great.
Okay.
It's cool.
Okay. Kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but Jenna would like to know, based on your experience writing for the Elite Universe and in working with Frontier recently, what would you like to see happen in the future to bring deeper lore, storytelling and character drama to the game?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? I think there's to be honest, the biggest thing that I would like to see is, I think, and I'm sure Frontier has a plan for this, but I must admit I don't know what it is. I'd like to see the Alliance come in and start doing some meatier stuff. They've been very, very silent in the game up until this point in time, and there are reasons for that, but it would be nice to see them doing some kind of cool stuff, and bringing some bits and pieces in, because they've got a very rich backstory in the game as well, and they're in an interesting position of being the underdog compared to the other superpowers. So that's one thing I think would be really cool to see. The whole Colonia thing, I think that's a massively rich seam of stuff. There's fascinating stories that could be told out there on a kind of new build almost of the game, a whole new society being built from scratch. That's got to be fascinating. But I also think the deep void exploration stuff in terms of what players are kind of doing, following an expedition out to Beagle Point or those sort of similar kind of expeditions. I think that would make for a very interesting storytelling experience as well. Quite how you roll that into the game, I'm not sure, but there's lots of potential in those kind of things. Tales of bounty hunting and tales of unscrupulous traders and all those kind of bits and pieces. Maybe a trading cartel that tries to strangle a series of systems. All of those are stories that could be told, which I think would work really, really well.
Yeah. It certainly lends itself to that sort of storytelling as well, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, it's an infinite. I don't think you could ever run out of stories to tell. It's a bit like Star Trek in that regard, isn't it? There's always another story you can come up with.
Yes.
Yes. Whereas the Elite Dangerous universe is so well kind of defined in terms of its technology. You haven't got to spend ages going, oh, and the Federation is this, and the Empire's that, and a frameshift driver is this, and
so much of it already established.
It's already there, ready to go, and everyone knows exactly.
Yes.
Everyone knows what it is,
yes.
So you can just start from there. And it would be great to see that stuff. One of the things that, I must admit, I think it would be fun to do is to maybe, I mean, they do it with videos, but I think it would be great for Frontier to maybe organise a fan fiction writing competition. I might see if I can get that off the ground with them, because if you had a competition for people to write short stories, they wouldn't necessarily be able to sell them, but certainly you could give away some free cool stuff as they do with videos. I think that would be fun for people. I think
that actually sounds really good idea.
Yeah, so
that idea.
Write a short story about a bounty hunter or a trader or something like that, and that could be quite a cool way to get people involved.
Yeah. Okay. Last question then. This is from Rend, and he says he's heading out to the Skull and Crossbones Nebula. Currently in the neighbourhood of the Orion Spur Shallows, and he's out there in a loaded Vulture exploration ship. It's a bit of an unusual ship to explore in.
It's going to say that's an interesting choice. Yeah.
He wants to know whether or not he should head back and settle down in the Bubble Mark 1 after returning, or would a better option to be head back to Colonia? Is there any potential for something perhaps happening out that way?
I think there's potential for all sorts of things to be happening all over the place, to be honest. I wouldn't want to recommend a course of action for an individual player.
Probably very wise.
I think people might take that as right. Everybody do this.
Get a flood out there.
I got a lot of flack for just taking my own trip out to Colonia when I went out there, because everyone assumed I was going for a reason.
Yeah.
The only reason I was going because I wanted to see it.
Yes, and suddenly everyone following you out there.
And why is Drew leaving the bubble? What I'd always advise people is if something interests you, go check it out. If you just want to explore, stick with exploring. Maybe you'll find something. If you want to influence the BGS, find some folks who are similarly minded and make a go of it. If you want to get a handle on the lore, then what DJ Truthsayer Graham is doing with his work with the sovereignty is the model to follow, because he gets to have an influence on the lore by the virtue that he's putting a lot of player time into that sort of stuff.
Yes.
So do what you do, and dare I say it, blaze your own trail.
Brilliant. Okay, well, there's a lot of questions there, Drew. I really appreciate you taking all the time to answer that. I think people will be grateful to hear all the answers there. So thank you for that.
No, that's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you very much for hosting that, and thanks to everyone contributing questions. It's great to hear the questions. They're always thought provoking. And I like the lightweight ones and the serious ones. It's nice to have the balance. So thanks very much, everyone. Great.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the event on the 29th as well, and perhaps after that, at some point, I can have you back on.
That would be fabulous. Hopefully, not too long a point after that, I'll have actually some concrete news on the book, because obviously the production timescales on that are a little bit vague at the moment. So fingers crossed. Once I've got something to report, then perhaps we can chat again.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Okay, thanks again, and I'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye bye now.